Good morning, afternoon, or evening with PressCorps Radio. I am Everett Way here with some breaking news. After a grueling 749 days of the deadliest, most destructive combat this world has ever seen, conflict number 75 has, finally, drawn to its far too extended conclusion. The Colonial securing a victory with the final destruction of capital towns that we will see for the foreseeable future. Early in the morning, late that evening, at about 2100 hours on day 749, Colonial forces led by the 1st Colonial Marine Division, assisted by numerous other regiments, concluded an extended, multi-day offensive on Lochinberth, a capital of Callahan's Passage. With its destruction, the Warden Empire have drafted and sent their formal declaration of a ceasefire to the Valian Republic, which was immediately accepted at terms. The ceasefire is effective immediately. This conflict, again, is finally over. All soldiers from all factions are to stand down and are ordered by both warring nations to disengage from all combat operations. I repeat, conflict number 75 of the Siva Valley War has finally concluded. It is finished. This conflict has had a remarkable impact on the story of this war, with it being the longest lasting, the most devastating, and by far the deadliest conflict in the multi-year history of this terrible war. With this war, we've seen the most liberal use of the most destructive weapons possible from both sides, with resource loss and casualties in numbers never before predicted. Many generals have expressed a battle weariness more publicly than before, from both sides expressing their desire to call a ceasefire and end what many see as prolonged suffering, and now, finally, their pleas for peace have been answered. As for the most deadly war in existence, the final casualty count was estimated well above 3 million casualties. The closest number we are able to find is 3,013,000. Some contacts in the logistics divisions from both sides have calculated that for the sheer casualties alone, the resource gathering has taken 13.3 thousand hours of scrapping collective for both sides. We've seen records in the number of high explosive rockets used, almost all of them expended. This was broken by the previous record of 3 rockets. Here we're seeing 7, with only 1 left remaining in Stone Cradle. The final rocket, as far as we know, was spearheaded by 1 CMD on the front line, the 1st Colonial Marine Division, assisted by many other factions and regiments, the 404th CGC, which is a French legion, as well as many others, claiming to take part in both the frontline offensives and helping down in Great March where the rocket was launched. Both sides are breathing a collective sigh of relief as this conflict finally draws to its conclusion. Transports are headed back to the home regions and staging locations for both factions and all parties involved. All soldiers, logistics members, and engineers are requested to find the closest transport back to their home island. It's unknown how long this ceasefire will last for. It's only a matter of time. As we get more details and more comes across our desk, we'll bring what information we can to you, our listeners. We may ourselves spend the night gathering our thoughts and breathing for ourselves. With PressCorps, I'm Everett Way, live from Studio A, here in PressCorps World Headquarters. We'll be back as soon as we can with more information, but for now, everyone can rest easy. The war has finally ended. Hello everyone, listeners, and those sitting around me actually, reporting live from Colonial home region. This is Everett Way with the PressCorps. I'm joined here by many members of the Colonial of many different factions. Looking around, I see Boat, I see DTX, I see VSAL, and standing next to me currently is Captain Rinzu of T3C, the Three Crowns. Rinzu, am I coming through fine? Just want to make sure you're coming through fine. Can you hear us? Alright, stand by, because there's a little bit of a delay before everything gets through. Oh, it doesn't seem like your sound is going through, Rinzu. I apologize. We could still ask some questions, and I'll relay them for the audience. So there's going to be a little bit of silence before we go through as I work out some of the technical details on the back end. It's possible we could try to get a direct line in, Rinzu, if you'd like to join us here in PressCorps. By all means, please. It's a PressCorps World Headquarters. You'll find the link in the common channels and the Foxhole official channels. For everyone else, I just want to get a quick impression here. There's a lot of Colonials kind of standing around me. How do we feel about the end of this war? How does the Army, the Legion, feel about this 32-day war that's finally come to an end? Lieutenant Rutabaga saying, it's been a very good war. Warden's not wanting to give up, not wanting to give it to us. We think we might have a solution.
It was a great war, but I'm glad it's over.
We think we might finally have a solution for some of the technical problems that we've been having. I apologize, listeners. With the end of the war,
I don't even know if there's a word beyond crazy, but
I don't think any town's changed hands as many times as Saltbrook did this war, in any war.
Saltongrad.
Yeah, Saltongrad.
Indeed, colloquially Saltongrad.
Would you like to,
understandable reasons. Actually, Rinzu,
would you like to join me in the Foxhole?
No, actually, we just patched it through. We can hear everybody's voice live over the air at the moment. We figured out what it was. It was a technical difficulty on our end.
Awesome.
Yeah, so...
but yeah, this war has been pretty crazy. There's been a lot of new players after Shard 2 got ended, or got cut. This Shard got flooded with a lot of new players, and it was really nice to see all the new faces. A lot of people were really interested in Logi, and we got a big recruitment boom in T3C, personally.
That's good to hear. Shard 2 being a off-site war effort, if you will, that all forces said, no, we're merging back into the main war effort here. This was one of the first wars where we saw a major population shift in that way. For both factions, it was certainly a high population war with a lot of enlistments all the way through the end. Usually we see that taper off. Was that your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely had a lot of new people stay till the end. As you can see, I'm surrounded by a bunch of Lance Corporals and Privates, and a couple people made it to Officer Cadet through this war. And yeah, this has been a wonderful war for people to learn the game and to get introduced to Foxhole and really experience what this game can really offer.
It's certainly been an eventful one. You see the entire spread of experiences from the beginning of the war to its bitter and extreme, and with the most rockets that we have ever seen launched in any conflict to date. Was T3C involved in the most recent rocket that officially ended the war?
I'm not 100% sure about that. You'd have to ask Snuggles about that. I actually just got back in right before the war ended. But like literally when I got back to the island, I got the message that the war had ended today. So I think I missed that particular event.
It's understandable. So, Captain Rinzu, you participated more in the early half of the war, if you will.
Correct, yes.
Right, and you were saying that before. What was your experience in the early half? That was a very long time ago. Many of us might have forgotten some of the events from there. What was your
yeah, it was definitely a tech battle. There's a lot of tech running and trying to coordinate for resources to be allocated towards the proper technologies. I think we did a pretty good job. There was a bit of back and forth with the wardens once they had their once they researched their silver hands and their tank destroyers. It was a bit of a touch and go there for a while, but I think once we got our logistics up and running to get our tanks out there, I think we definitely showed them what's what.
That's good to hear. With the tanks that you're saying they're getting out, T3C, and for those who don't quite know, maybe you're new to the Colonial or the Warden War effort, T3C is specifically known as a logistics clan, supplying not just their own operations, but many times they do large supply shipments for other regiment or even faction-wide operations. Was that also a focus for this conflict?
Yes, yeah, it was definitely always. We're always logistics focused. We also sometimes do naval landings. We did quite a few naval landings this war, and also there's we're always recruiting, and we love to have new recruits. However, I do want to give a shout out to a new Logi guild that popped up that seems to be mostly French. If you're a French player, called Elog, and they're kind of growing, and they seem pretty dedicated to the same goals as we are. So
there's been a significant increase in the amount of cooperation in that way, just like you're saying, with many people helping each other out on both the Warden and Colonial side. At the moment, standing in the Colonial home region, I can't exactly report on exactly what the Wardens are, but with many different regiments standing next to me here, like I was mentioning before, I see ZSU, I see HBL, ABK, DTX, Boat here, WG, and there's been several other the bigger faction names coming around. Notably, off the top of my head, one CMD recently had an event over in Monument Park here. SOM CRG was around, from what I heard, with the most recent rocket, if you will. There's a lot of regiments here representing themselves. To actually turn this back around to a question, the Colonials, compared to the Wardens, tend to have many, many smaller regiments that work together, and each regiment tends to be specialized, compared to the Wardens, much larger regiments that kind of can do everything in-house. Captain Rinzu, what's your experience in working with other regiments in that way, where you have lots of specialized but smaller regiments that maybe don't have the region-swelling manpower that Warden regiments tend to have?
That's a good question. I think that the big thing with my experience with logistics is that we're kind of the go-between for a lot of them, because we have so many specialized regiments. We tend to either they supply themselves because they are smaller, they can supply their smaller operations. However, for the larger coordinations, they tend to go through either us or all work together as a larger force to make sure everyone has the supplies they need for their operations. It's definitely a lot more coordination, but I feel like it does kind of give the smaller units more cohesion with themselves and when they actually do their op. And as long as we have good logistics to make sure everyone gets the supplies they need and make sure all the coordination gets done, everything tends to go pretty smooth. And I know that Raid and SOM and 1CMD are always doing their ops and doing a lot of really good work on the front line, so I think it works pretty well.
It seems to have, with, the main evidence presented as a close victory for the Colonials in this conflict specifically. Speaking of some of those smaller regiments, or at least maybe the new ones, I do want to turn my attention to some of the other regiments that are represented here. I see a lot of them here. Is anyone from some of the newer regiments okay with being asked a few questions? for those at home, there is quite a lot of Colonials here.
I mean, if no one else is going to speak up, I can talk about DTX.
This is Officer Cadet Kev Bob here of the DTX Regiment. Yeah, come on closer here. Step up to the microphone. Say hi.
Hello.
Yeah, so DTX, are you new with this conflict, or has this been several tours for you?
We came over from Shard 2 shortly before the war ended there. Right before the merge.
Okay, I see. And
as far as how old the clan is, I think it's like a month or two old. Beyond that, maybe.
Okay, I see. Compared to names like T3C, definitely on the newer side. But how has your experience been with this war? We've seen it's been very long, and there are a lot of experiences to have had.
Yeah, I am impressed at how long the war has taken, considering how I've heard that the wars are typically within about 10 days, especially from other regiment members. So it was a big surprise for me personally, as far as DTX is concerned.
Does DTX have a specialty, and does DTX stand for anything in specific?
DTX stands for Don't Take Xanax.
Okay.
That's a lesson to live by.
A lot of us do logi stuff. We were pretty involved in building bases in Alet's Bite.
I see.
Otherwise, we do whatever we can. We're a pretty small regiment.
And that's okay. As we were saying, the Colonial Legion tends to be built up of smaller regiments. So with you being an Alad's Bite, I'm sure you saw some of the fighting over in Endless Shore. Or did you stay mostly to that Alad's region?
Oh, we saw a lot in Endless Shore, yep.
Okay, perfect. I'd like to know your experiences in Endless Shore. How was that for you and DTX?
Well, I spent a lot of time dying in Saltbrook. Personally, as far as DTX is concerned, we ran some artillery stuff in the early days in Iron Junction.
Thank you.
Artillery
I don't know, it was pretty good.
Okay, was this mostly on some of the side conflicts, if you will, pushing over She Falls or Evil Eye, or was this directly in what did you all call it? Saltingrad?
Saltingrad. So in the early days of the war, like 10 days in or 12 days in or so, there was a huge bridge. There was like a 7 or 8 day bridge battle across Iron Junction, where the Wardens had set up a huge amount of bunkers on the other side, and we would push a little bit, but then we would end up falling back, basically over and over again. And we set up some artillery 3 days.
Yeah, my understanding with that
bunker positions.
Oh, apologize. I spoke over you. Say that again.
Just to shell their bunker positions across the river.
The early days of that Saltbrook fight was much closer to Iron Junction, and we saw kind of the latter half after some of the destruction around Saltbrook itself, and then pushing further north into North Star. That's where we really saw the Legion breaking through into that area. Was DTX involved in that breakthrough at all? Because that really shook up. That was a hard line for the history of the region.
We ran a few tanks at that point, but I think at that point we'd turned our attentions towards what's it called? Mallets? I can't remember. Sorry, I'm new.
It's a very wide valley. There's a lot of regions to remember. It's very understandable. So, final question for you. Oh, it sounds like somebody is using the local area as target practice for artillery itself.
Word is... I think that's actually a gender reveal. It's a boy.
Oh, no, not again.
I have to second that. It's a boy.
Oh, jeez.
Not again.
So, You said you were working with artillery, and we do know that there was all kinds of artillery, everything out from hand mortars.
Banana.
Sorry, apologies for that.
Have some
Everything
respect.
up from
This is live television.
everything from hand mortars
please
all the way
don't.
up to 300 millimeter storm cannon. What specifically was DTX working with when they were on the front line?
For the most part, we used 120 mil. There was a point where we had some 150 mil, but I think T3C was more famous for using 150 mil.
Yeah, we would regularly we do 1,000 rounds of 150 mil. Then we'd go pepper a base, try and dehusk it, and then back to the drawing board and make another 1,000 rounds.
The artillery, especially with how the engineers have changed how they work and operate and the mechanics behind all of them, it's changed recently from all accounts, and it's been not only a steep learning curve, but also an incredibly steep logistics curve to mount here. T3C, I imagine of all people, you would understand exactly how taxing artillery can be in the current day.
Yes, it takes a lot more to do the same amount as it did before, and not just because of the new spread, but also because you have to deal with wind, and then there was the whole learning curve, because it was the first war having that. There's a whole learning curve of how to really account for wind, how much it really affects things. But once we got it figured out, it's very immersive, and I definitely enjoyed it. I think everyone really enjoyed it. No Man's Land is a lot of fun, so it's a good mechanic. I think I'm really looking forward to seeing more of artillery expanding in the future.
Oh, I didn't know this recently got changed. And I just kind of came around, so.
Yep, the mechanics for artillery. Well, go ahead, Spencer. This is Spencer Morrow, also of the press, who's wearing our uniform.
Hello, Spencer Morrow here. The good Morrow. Just like Thea Morrow.
I always meant to ask, is there a relation, Morrow?
She's like my great aunt.
Oh, I see. A couple times removed. That's still actually rather amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice, but that's a story for another time. Right now, the story is for here, the Colonials, and their great triumph, overcoming the hard fight that was over there in Loken Burf, which was just teeth gnawing, just gnawing my own fingers off as I was just sitting there watching.
Woo! We nuked their asses.
So it is, and I'm gonna kind of sweep for the people back at home. For those just tuning in, the 75th conflict has recently come to a rather dramatic conclusion with the not only destroying but rocketing of the final capital town needed of Lochinberth in the region of Callahan's Passage. It has been the longest war at 31 days, with the highest casualty count we have seen at 3,013,000. Topping that, it is the most we have seen in any conflict. Certainly the longest. Most rockets that have been launched, with many contentious ideas of whether they were good rockets or not, whether they were useful rockets or not. These are the kind of conversations that always come up around those kind of rockets. And speaking of, I have a group of Colonials here, about 20 strong, all from different regiments, many unregimented, of many different ranks, everywhere from unranked to private, all the way up to lieutenant colonels here. I'm curious if in this crowd, if anybody was at the front line at Lochinberth at the time that the rocket landed. Was there anybody here who was there at the front when the rocket landed?
I was for a little while, but then I died. I didn't see the whole thing.
That's okay. This is a Second Warrant Officer Kabuki, who's standing next to me over here. You were there for most of the time, and the rocket landing itself, I'm sure, has a lot of stories, but I am actually just as interested in the lead up to it. My understanding is that it was a multi-day, extended offensive. How long were you there on the front?
I just joined up with them today. in Lochinburg. I forget the name of the town, but I was usually doing stuff over in the islands area. So.
Okay, and you came over towards the central mainlands to see the end of the war, or for this specific operation?
For this specific operation.
Okay, is there, just a curiosity, is there a group you normally work with? I don't see any regiment tags on you specifically.
I usually roll with the 77th for artillery, and otherwise I'm just doing independent logi wherever it's needed.
Okay, and for this operation, were you doing that independent logi, or was 77th active there?
Mainly independent logi.
Okay, understood. So with independent logi, we've talked a little bit with some of the people here with T3C and such about how intense some of the logi has been. How was it for this very last operation? Was it just as intense as the rest of the war?
I would say tedious.
Tedious? How so? Please, details.
Oh, the partisans. I kept getting ambushed periodically. It's just kind of... I don't know, we don't have a whole lot of escorts going on.
It's understandable. Partisans' jobs are to evade those escorts and do what they can, so it's not exactly a static obstacle.
No.
This is very tough. Did you manage to get past them, or were they recurring all the way up to the end?
They got me for a little while, then I went to take a break.
Understandable. Well, it is understandably their job to do that, just as it is the Colonial's job to hinder the Warden's war effort.
Yep.
What kind of logistics were you bringing in, out of curiosity? I heard there were tanks on the front line, I heard there was artillery, infantry needed, and the whole rocket itself.
Mainly BMATs, really. It's kind of easier to get shuttled out that way. I don't have the manpower to make mass things or pull things from storage places from far away, so it's just easier to get BMATs up yeah. Sorry, I gotta mute the Twitch stream and getting speech jammed my own voice.
Oh, it's understandable. Yeah, I honestly do it for myself, even though I have the earpiece in and listening to myself, it can be a little disorienting at times.
Yeah.
So yeah, how many, for a large offensive like that, how intense was the logistics? How many other logistics units did you see going in there?
I don't know, it's kind of hard to tell. I didn't really see that many myself, but that doesn't mean they weren't there.
Okay, fair enough. I guess as a final question, since you were in and out of the combat on the front line, I'm curious what other major obstacles was in the way, because my understanding is that there were multiple rocket attempts before there was one that succeeded at the end.
No, I was not a part of the rocket attacker for it, so you get the wrong person for that question.
Okay, fair enough. And you did say that. I'm curious if there was anyone else here who was on the front and as a combat person and can give a little more detail. I have a few people lining up in Studio A here in at PressCorps World Headquarters. I'm sure they have some news, but I want to hear from some of the boots on the ground before I go back to the studio. Sorry, to wrap that up, was there anyone here who was actually on the front line at the time of the rocket?
I think most of those people went to the send-off for the 1 CMD Colonial who's leaving us.
Mac.
I think they hopped off after that.
Oh yeah, I was there. It was touching.
Yeah. Oh, No Name was there. Okay.
Yeah.
That was a legendary celebration.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I caught the tail end of that.
It was pretty nuts seeing everyone line up and kind of be polite and everything as they go off. And there were some practice runs where we'd go down, he would say, attention, and then the various waves of these salutes would go off and you go, that was shit, do it again. And so then we went again a couple times. Brought a tear to my eye.
Yeah. For a bit of context for those who either weren't at the specific place in the home region or for those who are not Colonial and weren't able to see it, there is a member of, actually one of the leaders and I believe founders of the 1st Colonial Marine Division, who at the end of this war is publicly retiring. and that is the send-off that these soldiers are referring to at the moment. A few different voices in here. Captain Rinzu, we've already heard from Sergeant No Name of the Neat Regiment, all saying that they were there and listening. That was a rather touching ceremony. Any other words on the ceremony itself for the listeners at home?
I wish him luck. I'm happy to play with them, and I wish I could play with them more.
It was really amazing to see him, very respectful. I really didn't have a lot of the context going on because I'm fairly new to the game, incredibly new. So it was just really overwhelming to see everyone be so, I don't know, on the ball, cordial, working
Yeah, you
together.
got 100 people or that, right?
Yeah.
It was a nice ceremony.
So many people. You go and you go around the corner and then you just see crowds and crowds more.
And it was amazing to see that most of them just lined up, listened to the people, paid respect. It was really
The
great
fact
to
that
see.
there was even silence was amazing.
Yes, most of the people were actually respectful of the what was going on, which was amazing.
I think this is one of the few things that makes Foxhole such a beautiful game in general. All these events, you can say these RP moments of like memorials and whatnot. This is what makes the game truly special. The community and the things that other members set up and the roleplay that goes along with it makes this game truly special and unique. I don't think there's any other game that will that could even equate to Foxhole.
That's what got me hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, I'm hooked already.
That
I
last
think that was
voice
really well
being
said. Here.
very well
cheers
said
for
indeed.
Alton today.
That last voice who was hooked, Lieutenant Corporal Commander 476 over here, with the low rank assuming as a new player or into the war. Welcome. This is the Siva Valley War. This is what it's like fairly often. Win or lose. Win or lose,
incredible,
honestly, one of the big things is understanding that a lot of the soldiers are here specifically just to do their part. And while on the battlefield they may be enemies, out here outside of the war during the ceasefire, we're all humans and we're here just sharing an experience. And actually, that's about as good of a about as good of a segue as I can get into a note that was actually passed to me in my earpiece. I'd like everybody here to listen in, not just standing around me, but also live through our radio at the moment. I've been handed a statement, actually, by one of the commanders of the 82nd Dread Corps Legion. They are one of the largest warden regiments. Commissar Avitus has a statement, actually, for the Colonials here. Give me 1 second just to unfold it, get it already. As a statement from Commissar Avitus of the 82nd Dread Corps Legion, he says, quote, "The colonial heretics that washed against our lines for weeks always thought we would break, like the cowards that they believed we would act like them and give up. No matter how many times it takes, they will learn the lesson that the Warden Empire shall never give up, and we shall never surrender. You had to turn every city to ash in order to dislodge us. Our tenacity will never be beaten, and you paid in blood for that lesson. Unlike you, we shall never throw down our arms, for we fight for something greater than ourselves. We fight for the eternal glory of Callahan. Siva itself broke before the Wardens did." Unquote.
Huh, that's a nice way of saying humble.
Did we ever nuke any of our own territories?
No, there was a ton of
Not
police
that I know
failing
of.
to nuke Dirk at
I'm
the
pretty
end.
sure they nuked their own territory at one point, didn't they?
No,
Yes.
no, they nuked something they just lost, basically.
They nuked Skelter. It was basically
The official
was
record
probably
of that was that and we heard from some statements from wardens in PressCorps that they specifically held fire on the rocket until they believed that there was no saving that town, which was essentially
Okay,
when
wait,
it
just come
fell
over
in the
here
manner in
and
which
I'll
it
explain
fell.
to you without interrupting him. Okay, basically, so what's going on? There's these guys. There's like a clan.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's still in a little bit of range. It sounds like there's somebody explaining what's going on standing around
I
here.
honestly, I think the idea to be polite is really nice.
No, I very much appreciate it.
I definitely agree with that.
It's a great idea.
But no, that was a...
Coming from different games, it's pretty incredible. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's totally fine. Just wanted to kind of reiterate back to the statement that Commissar Avitus made. This is a statement that is directed at all Colonials. And we'll share it live for the sake of impartiality. This is a station not just for Colonials, even though I'm standing here, but for Wardens as well and everybody non-partisan back home. I don't want to give the impression that this is a Colonial-centric, only that we are reporting from Colonial home region currently. There's a bit more of a statement, but we're getting to that. I want to thank everybody here who's standing next to me. I do have several people who are in our studio at the moment that are looking to patch themselves in and give some statements. We are still going to be broadcasting after about a 1-minute break. So if you're still listening to the radio, I'll be standing right about here. Otherwise, our radio channel, as you hear, for all of our listeners, you're already there. Everybody in standing around me can find that fairly easily. If somebody can type that out for an easy patch in, that would be great. Until then, we're signing off from live interviews. Thank you, everybody here. Just absolutely everybody. Thank you for all of your on-the-spot attention and respect for the live radio. Thank you again. And for our listeners at home, thank you very much for listening in. We are going to take a very short break. Here we go. We're going to take a very short 30-second set of silence as we kind of rearrange some of the wires over here. And we're going to get a couple interviews here in the studio. This is going to be a talk section, much like you've heard our Zero Dark PressCorps, if you will. We're going to hear from a few people who are already lined up. I believe, actually, we're already set up. This is going to be about a 30-second patch over, so there will be a little bit of silence, not enough room to actually play any music. So listeners at home, please stand by.
Alright. Like I said, I don't know where the drugs are.
No. This is Press Journal, not... Don't worry, you're not in trouble for anything. We're back patched into Studio A here in PressCorps World Headquarters. I'm joined here by some of the people coming in who have been waiting, actually, to get themselves patched in here in the studio. The first person up has been Ulfbert of UCF, a Colonial clan, and a lieutenant colonel of his own right. Ulfbert, how are you doing today?
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and also to the men of the PressCorps. And I'm doing well.
That's good. Were you around for the end of the war?
Only briefly. I was mostly spending my time playing Sea of Thieves. Couldn't be bothered to get in, and also the queues were god-awful.
There was quite a bit of the server maintenance obstacle, if you will, and here there are some of the mechanics that we can't really talk about in a nice and easy roleplay setting kind of thing. So we kind of have to say, yeah, the queues, from what I understand, for both sides, were a bit problematic.
Suffice to say, my train leaving for the front line was delayed due to technical issues.
I see. So you weren't on there for the very end. Was UCF very active around this war?
Not particularly, which is a bit of a shame, but however, understandable considering that we've been fighting hard for the past few wars, so we kinda needed a breather.
I think a lot of people are going to be feeling that after this war. There are a lot of people, especially in the beginning, that went very hard, for lack of a better word. And then going back way, way to the beginning of the war, going as hard as many regiments did, only to have the entire war reset, was a huge blow to morale on both sides. Were you? I know you said you were taking a break mostly for that, but were you around for the reset? Did you invest any time in that?
I was mostly called away for other matters during that time, but I did receive news on the reset. Initially, I was a little, how do I say this in a child-friendly manner? I was a little upset that the reset happened, but however, considering that our recovery was done fairly well, it really didn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and that's what it seemed, especially if it's such a long war as it is, as a reset of a couple hours in the beginning. And don't get me wrong, those first couple hours are very important, but there were many other factors that contributed to the outcome of this war more than just the first several hours.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the big things we saw this war was kind of an interesting pitched battle between the east and west sides, and I'm curious what the warden perspective of that is. Me mostly reporting on the colonial side and talking to those soldiers. We have siege coming up next, so I'm actually a little curious to hear from them. But from your perspective as a colonial, Endless Shore mostly holding and is groundbreaking. That's not quite the right word I want to say. It's ground that's constantly given and taken from both sides and not exactly stable, versus the West, which has been a slow push to the north. Have you heard? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were going to say?
I really didn't serve all that much in the east. Anytime I was in the rear, sapping enemy supply lines. I was mostly dedicated to the west. And I will say that I would take a stable, slow push over whatever the hell the mess that was in Saltbrook Channel. I am half certain that there was about 50 to 60 battles in Saltbrook Channel alone, and that city was leveled to the ground. The bricks were practically dust.
It's pretty devastating and sobering walking in there. I actually took a walk several hours ago and reported from it after the rocket landed. It was the quietest that I had heard the city throughout pretty much the entire war. Of course, a few hours after that, there was a large armor column that worked its way through there, and battle picked up again. But even just for like a few minutes, it was almost silent. It was very weird compared to the massive amount of deaths in combat and bullets and shells that were fired throughout the rest of the war.
Saltbrook, for all intents and purposes, was dead.
Saltbrook itself, not just the people there or the idea of the front. The town was dead.
Dead. It was practically erased off the face of the earth.
For anyone who had not seen, this is towards the listeners at home, for anyone who had not seen, there are many pictures. Some of them we've shared here in PressCorps World Headquarters, showing exactly how devastated they were. We understood that with the new artillery mechanics, artillery could permanently destroy many of the defenses and houses in there and create craters. We did not expect, I don't think, exactly how devastating it was. Ulfbert, if you walk there, could you find even 10 square meters of ground to build on after all that place went through?
Every 10 inches there was a crater.
It was pretty devastating. It was pretty insane. I know you hadn't had much experience in this particular war. Was there any notable offensives, offensives, or defensive operations that you were a part of? War story to share?
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to speak on it, but I'm pretty certain Spencer knows about my little thing in the Colonial Sigil with my radio show. I've been reporting on those. Anyway, to answer the question, I'll answer one notable offensive and one defensive operation, more or less. And to be honest, it's all going to be on the Western Front because that's only where I've ever been.
Well,
So,
we report on all fronts, so it's okay. Go on.
Yeah, that's fine. Either way, for an offensive operation, this was done fairly early in the war, within the first 100 to 200 days. It was an operation with UCF, KSR, and MAD. It was practically one of the few operations that UCF ever did. Our mission was to go in to Mara, UCF, and MAD, along the Wish road, and take the town. The objective ultimately was to take the town, push along the site, and take out the concrete bunkers due north of Mara, and hopefully liquefy the front enough so that we could force the wardens back across the border into Stone Cradle. I was there mostly repairing the Bob due south of Mara, and after the initial bombardment from Warren artillery, which was about 300 Warden shells, we eventually took the city after about 5 or 6 hours, and a few days later, the entire region was green.
I remember looking at the Western Theater, if you will, at Pharenic Coast for a little bit just before that started. Colonials had a really hard time pushing across from that inner island out towards the outer mainland, if you will. Mara being one of the major strongholds there. And by all intents and purposes, it was just an intense fight from what you're describing as some of the fights we've seen towards the end of the war.
It was an intense fight. If anything, that fight probably saved Faranac as a whole on the account that no offensives across the river was making any headway. So our best option was literally the worst option. Come in from the border and try to take it.
It's certainly very tough with the rapid decay zone there, but it seems that in the end it worked out. Pharenic Coast flipped green within the next day or two, and well, the rest is history.
On to the second one, which would be the defensive. This would be after the Stone Cradle nuke, where the Wardens, for whatever reason, led a massive invasion on all fronts. I'm pretty certain they probably had vast stockpiles ready for Warden Weekend on that account. Anyway, many people on our faction were scared of that particular weekend because our fortress in Mudhole had been destroyed completely. Ulster Falls, that had held out for a week, was taken away, and we were back across the river. It seemed like that things are about to break. However, we were banking on the fact that all of this offensive was done within the time span of 72 hours, and all the ground that they took was lost ground. So, a lot of us got our heads together and figured, okay, if we can hold them at key locations such as the hard line, hold them at Scythe and Jade, and all these other little places, or even just Alice for that matter, because I know the map wasn't looking too good out east, we could stop the offensive and go on the counterattack because they would be exhausted. And that prediction ended up being correct, and within about, I think, 2 weeks, the war will be over.
And so it was, though it seems to be a risky play. From my understanding, that Warden Weekend, as it was called, along the Western Front, lost all of Stone Cradle after the rocket, lost all of Orebreaker, and the Wardens were pushing down into the upper reaches of Fisherman's Row.
If I can comment about that rocket.
Sure, last comment, and then I do want to get to the next listener. But yeah, let's hear about this, because we haven't talked about this rocket.
The initial reaction on the Colonial side in regards to Echelon's rocket was not exactly the best, but it wasn't particularly the worst either. Nothing can top the disaster that was WNS, the War in North Stars rocket during War 19. However, a lot of us didn't really exactly see the point in it until a week after the fact, where defenses such as Conclave and also Reliqua were decaying due to severe lack of G supplies coming in, G and bunker supplies, garrison bunker supplies, going into Fisherman's to keep those major fortifications running. And if anything, that region, not Fisherman, or Breaker or Isles, had held us up for way too long, and we were glad that the entire region was green, and we would move on to the moors and also to Reaching Trail. I commend the wardens for holding on so well to that region, but god damn, that was a pain in the ass for all of us. Sorry for the language, but however, I just had to express that.
Nope. Understood. The Wardens have actually already put out a response to many of the, to the entire Colonial Legion, saying something to the effect of that there was not a Warden surrender. They had to be forced out of the Mercy Valley and out of the war explosively by rockets. So as far as them not giving up, I believe the Wardens share those sentiments. A bloody and very much an uphill battle the entire way through and through.
3 million deaths over the course of a month.
It's absolutely insane. Anyway, I do want to get to the next caller. Thank you very much, Ulfbert, for your war stories and all of your words.
And thank you for having me, Everett.
Mm-hmm. We're going to get to two of our next callers. As very quick for those just joining in, we're here in Studio A at PressCorps World Headquarters. Our call queue is open. I honestly don't know exactly how long this is going to be. We're kind of running this closer to our Zero Dark PressCorps, but there's no developer here. We're hearing some war stories and talking a little bit about how the conflict that just ended happened. There's a lot of stories and ideas and just things to be shared, and a lot of people who want to listen and want to get their stories heard, and we're here for that. Next up is actually a pair from the Regiment Siege. I'm going to drag them in now. Here we are. We have two members of the Regiment Siege Echo and judojj. Am I pronouncing that right?
It's judo, but yeah.
Judo? Okay, that works. Welcome to the program. Did the two of you, from my understanding, the two of you wanted to join together? Just want to make sure that that is all right by the two of you?
Yeah.
Yep, we just came here and we were actually talking with Ulfbert, and, we decided we'd stop on by.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of Ulfbert, one of the last things that he was just saying was noting how much of an uphill battle it was for the Colonial win the entire way through, and was commending the Wardens for that. A similar sentiment was shared by Commissar Avitus of the 82nd Dreadcorps Legion, saying that Wardens didn't give up this war. They never surrendered. The land itself broke before the Wardens did. Those are very strong words by him. I'm curious if Siege feels the same way.
Well, let me tell you, Buckler broke before the Guard did, and so did every other town before it. And it was definitely an uphill battle for the collies the whole way through. But it was a very, very fun war the whole way through.
Except for the amounts of G-subs we had to put into our bunker. But other than that, it was a pretty fun war.
It was a fun war. There was definitely some stress involved, but it was a very enjoyable, very uphill battle the whole time for the Colonials, I'm sure, and a frantic defense on our part the whole time as well.
There's absolutely there's a lot of fun to be had. I'm a person who very much enjoys not only rooting for the underdog, but seeing those kind of stories happen. The win or loss for me personally is not as important as just having a good story to share and a good experience all around. That said, I'm sure there were a couple that were better than others. What were some of the high points for Siege this war?
Well, let me tell you one that was, at least for me, maybe wasn't much of a highlight for the rest of the clan, or as it was for myself. But funny enough, I was heavily involved in both the Skelter nuke and the Reaching Trail nuke, somewhat accidentally on the Reaching Trail nuke, because I was the one that had accidentally built it and the Colonials fired it. So in a weird way, I was maybe the first person in Foxhole history to be more or less directly responsible for nuking my own faction twice. That's interesting. I don't know if it's a good thing, and not to say that nobody else was involved. Obviously, that's not at all true, but it was a highlight for me, at least.
That certainly is a highlight, and actually, I'm a little surprised that that particular event would be admitted not only so openly, but so nonchalantly, I guess, with a bit of humor, and I very much appreciate that. Let's actually focus on that Reaching Trail rocket, because I did want to hear more about it. My understanding is that, and this is kind of breaking some of the role play a little bit. My understanding is that because the squad lock feature does not go across faction, that was the reason why the Colonials were able to use that rocket. Is that correct?
Well, to be 100% honest with you, I had no idea that rockets were not faction locked. I thought they went off the same principle as storm cannons or like artillery pieces or emplacement anti-tank weapons. I thought once you built the site, it's a Warden site or it's a Colonial site. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't have an issue with the fact that the enemy could come in and use the site, but I think it would be nice if that would be more like, the enemy can come in and steal your storm cannon. I don't know, whatever. It's an interesting concept at the very least. But I had no idea about it until it happened, and then it was kind of like a funny thing, at least to me. I was like, oh, I had no idea that was even possible.
I don't quite think the Colonials thought it was possible either. They saw a completed and fueled or fueling rocket. Wasn't quite sure at the time. The timeline of some of the events are still scattered. Went up and realized that it was accessible. It was a very interesting moment for both sides. So you were there for the building of the rocket. Were you there for some of the rocket attempts with that rocket specifically?
So I believe we lost control of that rocket before it was ready for a launch. In fact, somebody told me that the rocket was only 2 hours away from being able to hit any region when the Colonials launched it. I believe maybe part of the reason they launched it in the end was because they just wanted to get rid of it, so we couldn't use it, because we ended up taking a Reaching Trail back in the end. But I'm not sure about that, to be honest.
Judo, did you happen to be there on the defending Reaching Trail at the time the rocket was captured?
No, I think I was sleeping at the time. I didn't really do anything up that north. I was more around like Saltbrook in that area, so.
Another
really
Saltbrook warrior.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time there. Wasn't, some parts wasn't great, but it was interesting, to say the least.
As much as there's a lot of stories around Saltbrook between the what some have come to call jousting between the many storm cannons that were in the area and some of the footwork involved in that. The rockets were absolutely one of the highlights of the war. And as far as contentious rockets go, as you were mentioning before, Echo, this particular rocket that landed in Orebreaker, a lot of the stories that we've heard here on PressCorps, and we talked about a little bit in some of the live interviews from the home region, it's all from a colonial perspective. And there's been indirect or secondhand stories that we have heard and then relayed, but we haven't heard from the mouth of a warden just yet. How involved were you in that rocket?
Well, it's a little funny that you say that. A lot of the things that I've seen around that rocket, HOC gets a lot of the I don't want to say blame, but they get like the credit, if you will, of the main reason the rocket was launched, and that's not wrong. I mean, Fireman definitely was the person who had the radio backpack on and fired the rocket in the end, and he deserves all the credit for that in the world. But the decision to nuke, or not nuke, but destroy Axehead, or not Axehead, the Skelter Course, excuse me.
Skelter Course, yes.
Was made by kind of like a unanimous, or I don't want to say unanimous decision, but a decision in like the higher levels of the Warden faction. And once again, I want to act like I'm the only person that had any say over this or anything like that. It was a lot of people coming together, but I was definitely one of the people that was pushing for it quite a bit and maybe got the ball rolling, at least in my opinion. Once again, I don't want to like act like I was the only person that did anything to make this happen, but I definitely would say that I definitely pushed for it a little bit harder than most people. And that in the end, the rocket was fired with, I remember KGG, bless them, an amazing clan to work with all the time. They were very worried about launching it at the end because they were afraid that they were going to have a Jade Cove 2.0. And in the end, I don't think it was like that. In fact, I think it was a very good decision. I think it made the war last a lot longer than it would have had otherwise. But it was a very interesting time in that few minutes that we had to make those decisions, especially to be in a sort of high-ranking position during all of that. It was an honor. I mean, to be honest with you.
It's interesting how you're speaking of this event, that it is an honor and that it's a collective effort. A lot of the rhetoric that I had heard from the Colonials had been at first confusion, but then understanding. And I think hearing it more directly from Wardens will help cement that understanding quite a bit. And I guess on the subject of understanding, I agree with you with comparing this rocket with the War 19 Jade Cove rocket. They're not comparable. They're not. Those two scenarios aren't, and one of the major not selling points. One of the major notable aspects of the Jade Cove incident, if you will, was a lot of the infighting up until the last even 30 seconds of the rocket launch itself, from the site all the way out to the rocket launch location, all the way, like from there all the way to the target. There was contention, but from what you're saying, there was cooperation, and it was pretty collective, the decision to rocket it.
Yeah, absolutely. The decision, everybody maybe wasn't in 100% agreement, but everybody understood what we had to do, and in the end, everybody came together and made that happen. There was no great argument or great shouting match or anything like that. It was a decision by the whole group.
And that's what's. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Judah.
There was a lot of at the beginning of it. Echo was trying to get people to get on board with it, and it definitely took a lot of attempts to get people on board with getting rid of Skelter. But I'd say after a little while, people started to realize the importance of it, which I think definitely helped. So. Yeah.
It's an interesting strategic option, and actually, I want to ask a little more detail about that, if that's okay. With the war over, I think talking about some of the more strategic and tactical decision making can, in a non-RP sense, only make future wars better by enhancing and making strategies better. So, what was the core trigger, if you will? What was the decision-making process behind? Do we think we can take this back from the Conclave, or rocket it, or save our rocket for another target?
Well, I took no joy in nuking our own, or not nuking, you understand what I'm trying to say, destroying our own city. But it was something that we all kind of agreed at this point was the best option, and part of that was because the Colonials had already made the decision to destroy bucklers. And so we understood that as a Colonial, if you wanted to transport something from a refinery to the front, you were going to have to go all the way from, Fairmore or Fisherman's, whatever it is. You'd have to drive quite some distance to get from a refinery to the front, and in all likelihood, you probably weren't coming from there because they didn't have factories and refineries. So you're probably coming all the way from Westgate now, or you're probably coming all the way from Blemish now. And so it was a strategic decision that we decided, if we can get rid of this refinery, even if it doesn't get rid of the Conclave factory, it will make Colonial logistics a lot tougher. And I think, to be honest, it showed results, because the war lasted a long time after Skelter fell, or it was destroyed. I think it proved results. Even in the end, we didn't win, but we fought on for a long time.
Absolutely, and I would say, as far as sportsmanship goes, that's absolutely the way that these wars should go. Fighting all the way to the bitter end. Understandably, there are times where, like, okay, we're not going to win, but fighting all the way, literally to the last 10 minutes in this war, I think there was a lot of, for lack of a better word, honor shown by the Wardens, especially at the end. One last question, and then I want to get to some of our other callers here. Speaking about the very end of the war, I think I asked this earlier, but just to reiterate, were the two of you there for that one?
Which one?
Sorry, Lochinberth specifically.
I was not there for Lochinberth. Judo, I don't believe you were, but I'll let you speak to that.
I was not there for Lochinberth, but I was in the queue to get into Lochinberth. I had been waiting for about 40 minutes. There was a queue of 15 to get in there.
I'll be honest, I was as well. Like, I was trying to get in and on scene for so long in the queues. It even affected us in press, so
I was actually, I think I was third in queue, and then the war went over. Like, I checked back in, and I saw that, and then as soon as I checked back in, it said resistance phase is starting soon.
I see. Well, and Judo, I do want to ask, because I don't want to leave on a I wasn't there kind of question. I do want to ask about your experience in what many people are calling Saltingrad, which is Saltbrook Channel. I don't know if the same nickname has been given on the Warden half of the field. But
we definitely did have signs calling it Stalingrad, but, like, people would put signs around saying, "Welcome to Stalingrad. Don't expect to live very long," and stuff like that. But
that is very much true.
It was super tough. Like, we had a storm cannon in Foxcatcher, and every time the Colonials would take, what was it called, Saltbrook?
Mm-hmm.
Every time they would get into the North Star, which is a little path right north of Saltbrook, we'd always storm cannon that little part. And I'd say that, if we didn't have those storm cannons there, or if no bunker bases were in Foxcatcher, I'd say we would have definitely lost probably a good chunk of land earlier in the war. But, with those storm cannons being there, it just turned into this meat grinder of just back and forth, taking Saltbrook and, pushing out and taking Well Church and all these other places, and then getting pushed back, and then, it was just this huge tug of war. And if we never had those storm cannons there, I doubt that whole tug of war would have happened, and we would have probably maybe even lost Foxcatcher and a few other places and weathered before the end of the war, or maybe all weather. Who knows?
It was very interesting, and one of the noted perspectives, if you will, on the Colonial side was the placement of factories with this war. Along the western side, one of the reasons that the Colonials had such success is because they had more factories along those western columns. To compare on the eastern side between Kirknell and Port of Rhyme, the Wardens had a lot more factories and were able to hold everything between all of that, Maidens Vale, and then holding on to it for the first I want to say like 10-ish days of the war, holding on to the factories in Saltbrook itself. All of that helped out compared to the one factory in Allad's Bite, like one in Bats and such. Did you find defending from Foxcatcher with the Storm Cannon? Did you find all of that easier with the logistics lines as open as they were?
I think anybody could have seen how factories and the ability to produce weapons definitely affected this war quite a bit. I mean, like as you just stated, the Wardens were able to hold in the east, where we had more logistical support, a lot better. We were holding on to Endless till the very end there, or in other places we'd been pushed much further back where we had less logistical production. So yeah, absolutely. It being closer to those factories, and I just as a reference, this war, our bunkers, or 3 bunkers actually near Foxcatcher, consumed roughly 2,000 crates of G supplies, and that would have been almost impossible to keep up with. It would have been impossible to keep up with, considering it was destroyed in the end. But on the western side, so being able to do that, obviously, it changed the way that we were able to fight.
That's a lot of supplies, and I'm actually I'm super curious. I have a bit of a weak spot for some of the mathematics that are involved in logistics. I am really curious how some of that turns out, like what the final numbers were for bases that large. Partially out of curiosity and partially out of game balance, looking at how factories are positioned, what queues are open. There's all sorts of things that go with that, but as a player, when I have to put my press hat down, one of the big things that I look at is the logistics effort and some of the numbers involved in that. That's the feedback that I tend to give. So the fact that you're sharing that it took that much is absolutely mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, it was crazy to supply. Sorry, Judo, if you'd like to.
Yeah, the amount of BMATs and just all the scrapping we had to do. Now I wasn't really a part of the logistics part during the war. I was busy with a lot of other stuff, in my actual life. But whenever I did get the chance to supply our bases, it was challenging at times. Sometimes we didn't have any BMATs. We'd have to get some from Kirknell, because usually Kirknell was filled with a bunch, but Port of Rhyme and our bunker bases usually didn't really have any. So, it was always a challenge to really supply them, but in the end, I'd say we did manage to somehow supply it with the circumstances we had.
It takes a bit of effort, honestly, any sort of building in this game currently does, but those bases are needed. As you said, building that line at Foxcatcher might have been one of the things that held the Western Front for the Wardens, and maybe caused Colonials to think, well, this is not the path, Weathered Expanse is not the path to victory, and push it elsewhere. So decisions like that make the stories of the war happen. On that note, I can't really think of a better way to sign out. I do want to get to some of the other callers, though. Echo and Judo, thank you so much for taking your time to come into the studio with me.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem, thank you for having us.
For those catching in, we have a lot of viewers at the moment. Thank you all for listening. If you have not heard the news, the 75th conflict has come to its explosive and bloody conclusion. It has been an absolute mess. 749 days of the deadliest, the most destructive combat this war has seen. It has been absolutely incredible. It ended with a Colonial rocket landing on Lochinberth, the capital town and final victory point that was needed for the Colonials. More specifically, they didn't take the town, they rocketed it, reducing the number of victory points needed to match the victory points that they owned. And maybe with a little bit of perspective on that, I have our next caller here. I'm just going to drag him into channel. I know it's always a bit awkward. All right, here we go. To give us maybe a bit of perspective, back to the Colonial perspective at least, is Major General Marcus of the 45th.
Hello.
All right,
how are you?
Hello?
Everett,
hey.
How are you?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. It's 8 a.m. for me, so I'm a bit tired, so I may slur in my words, if that's okay.
That is okay. Well, good morning to you. I'm sure you woke up to, as a Colonial, what would be good news for this war.
I did not wake up. I was up all night, man. I was at the rocket launch site when it happened. I was sitting there for hours.
I see. We actually have not had the opportunity to talk to anybody who was at the front line in the combat on either side, Warden or Colonial. So please tell me your experience. What was it like in the final moments?
I did not get into Calaan's Passage, so I decided to go to the Great March. What we were doing there, we were just messing around, really. I remember we made a campfire and we began running around it like idiots, to put it simply. It was a very fun time, and so yeah, I don't have much to say. We just messed around a bit, waited for the rocket to launch and for the war to end.
Okay, well, I guess, every war ending does need its celebration.
Yeah.
This celebration, I heard something about a Colonial party out on the Dirk. Is that what you were talking about?
No, not the Dirk. Well, I was also there further back. But, there were a party. I was there when there were mostly Colonials. Wardens began showing up when I left. And basically, we were just having fun and just messing about because the war was pretty much over, but it wasn't really, so
That's good to hear. I apologize. Just a minor technical thing was tweaking on the back end. So what other battles was the 45th involved in throughout this entire war? Was the 45th very active this war?
Yeah, we play every weekend, really, so we had our events. I remember the Saturday at the 3 EST, 3 to 5:30, we had an artillery event in Tempest. I think it was at Camino Estate. It was the relic base in the northeast of Tempest. We basically set up 3 150mm cannons, and we had 1,000 shells, and we just fired away. That was
how many shells? I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
1,000 shells.
1,000 shells. That's what I thought I heard. Did you specify which caliber?
150mm shells, to be specific.
Okay, yeah, that's the expensive one. So I'm curious, how much preparation something like that takes.
Well, basically, as the leader, I don't really do much of the preparation, but I have officers and people under me to do it. It took maybe a week. One of my guys just goes Logi insane. I try to actually stop him doing too much Logi because I don't want him to get burned out. But a week or two, we already had a lot of EMATs and HEMATs in the storage, so it wasn't that hard making it. Because one of my guys is just spamming out EMATs all the time, so. But it takes a lot of work. But it pays off, I'd say.
That it does, and I mentioned a little bit earlier that one of my personal interests in the war is some of the mathematics that go into logistics, and I looked into the artillery specifically, especially with some of the more recent changes. Some of the batteries that we've seen from Colonials have been 4 to 6 heavy artillery strong, which is a large amount of logistics. The numbers that I was looking at was that if you want to fire 5 or 6 artillery, heavy artillery pieces specifically, you're looking at needing a truck of crates of 150mm every minute and 15 seconds to keep them running.
I remember we actually had 6 artillery guns, but we didn't really have the space to put them anywhere because the island we were on was so small. Also, we had some issues with vehicles getting themselves stuck downhill because they couldn't get back up. So we had some issues there, but we figured it out. There's mostly space. Our manpower was there, so we could have possibly brought a couple extra. We made 2 crates of 150 mils in total.
2 crates? Did you say that?
Yep, 2 crates. So that would be 6.
Oh, you mean the 150 mil cannon itself, not
Yes.
the okay, I see. Sorry, I was confused there. I'm like, did you were just saying no, but the actual pieces.
Yes.
And that makes sense. Produced through the MPF is a bit cheaper.
I
so
also
you were
believe we made 1,000 mortar shells as well this war.
that's quite a hefty number. So you said you were using these in Tempest Island. When during the war, and where were you using them?
Last night, Saturday, 3 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. EST.
Okay, I see. So this was pushing more along the northern bit of Tempest.
Yeah, it was the only stable front we could have gone to. The west, too chaotic. Marvin Hollow, it was just, we were there early and it didn't really work out. We knew Saltbrook was a mess. It was not even worth going there. It already got destroyed by a rocket. So we went to Tempest. We had a few queue issues, so we got in fine. And basically we just bombed away. I actually tried to avoid hitting the relic base so we could get some more shells off before we killed it. But we ended up destroying it, so.
I see. That might have been one of the first relic bases actually destroyed by 150 millimeter, from my understanding. Lots of times when 150 is on the scene, they will soften up defenses, but then it'll either be satchels or tanks that actually go in and do the damage.
There wasn't much softening up. They were like when we first began. I remember in the beginning, I saw the wardens were pushing hard with a lot of infantry and armor. So I was frantically pulling, saying like, "You get on the gun and begin firing." So I basically began firing the first gun before the other 2 were ready, just to get something down. I didn't really care what we hit because we had enough shells. So the entire goal was just to do a full-on blocking barrage. And it seemed to have succeeded, because eventually we began pushing. We killed the relic base. I actually remember the guy killing the relic base. He was one of my master sergeants, Philip. He was the guy that got the killing blow. And then afterwards, we moved up to destroy the border base. I remember the wardens trying to pull out, I believe, 4 of their own heavy artillery. But we were so constant with artillery barrage, they were eventually forced to pull out, and we kicked them out.
I see. With artillery recently, my understanding is that it's actually operating it. Once you get locked into the rhythm and you can account for the wind and you have your distance, all that stuff is pretty rhythmic. It's kind of like a pace that you can keep up with pretty easily, but it's still so people intensive.
Yeah.
Between that and the like building up all the crates of ammunition beforehand, you have to spend maybe a couple days on the back end, certainly a lot of MPF time, to get the amount of crates that you need.
Definitely.
How much preparation did you guys do for this kind of thing?
Well, usually we play in the weekends, so we do logistics over the week. So we have around 5 days of doing logistics, then we play. Usually we try to drive stuff up a day earlier, but the thing is, with the changing fronts, we usually only do planning on the day of the operation to make sure we can get the best intel, we can have the best operation with the most chance of success.
Excellent, and it sounds like with the taking out of that relic, that opened the way for a colonial movement up into Godcrofts. There was a bit of a stopping point, however, at a large storm cannon base, from what I understand, in Godcrofts at Blackwatch. Yeah, Blackwatch.
We tried to get artillery pieces up, but the soldiers there were not experienced enough to dig in and fortify the position, so we didn't feel it safe to move up our artillery. So we decided not to, and we headed west. I don't remember. I think it was Lost Arch was in the east and Acamino Estate was in the west. So we went to that middle island between and we set up there because we knew the wardens were pushing in that area. We only got a few shots off because we had to call the operation at that point. So we left the artillery and the last shells to public so they could use it.
I see. When you say you moved them west, where west did you move them?
Let me just pull up the map here. Just give me a moment. Yeah, we put them at the island between the Rush, Churchgate, and Acamino Estate.
It's an island that doesn't have a name, and I wish there was a name for it because lots of combat does happen on there.
Yeah.
And I've tried some way to call it, but there's not really a name for that island. I know the one you're talking about. It is very odd.
Maybe we should just come up with a name at some point.
We could. If you do, let me know. It sounds like the amount of combat and artillery you've landed in, just the overall area, you have a good idea. So.
I don't really have an idea right now, but I might think of something. Usually, us in the 45th, we are normally an infantry division. Actually, we're more mechanized. We try to specialize in Duros. They're a good all-around vehicle we use. And we split up into different fire teams for easier communication and so on.
I see. Well, it's good to try your hand at, for any group, even as specialized as they are, to break out and try different things. As a final question, since your infantry group did a lot of artillery, how do you feel about the artillery mechanics now that they've changed and we've seen how they work in a long war?
The wind is annoying, to put it simply, but it's just getting used to it. I personally use the Sigil HQ. I can have an artillery, a circle where I can see different ranges, so I can put it where the artillery is, so I can get an idea, and I can use a ruler to just get the length of stuff. So usually I try to go for that, then I give the distance and azimuth of my desired target, I fire a ranging shot, and then I adjust from that. So it's not really hard, it's more experience getting used to it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a learning curve, as we're hearing from lots of people who even specialize in artillery. It's quite a learning curve from the old days, if you will, with the older mechanics.
Yeah, definitely. But all you need is the right tools, then you can fire away and destroy the enemy, pretty much.
Excellent. Well, it seems to have worked in this time. I want to thank you for your stories here. We're going to move on to the next caller at this point. Thank you very, very much for calling in.
Have a good day.
Yep, you as well. And for all of our listeners at home, again, thank you very much for calling in. This is a bit of an impromptu kind of story sharing time here on PressCorps. Conflict number 75 has ended in a Colonial victory, and we're hearing from both sides, Colonials and Wardens. I'd actually love to hear from a few more Wardens on some of their perspective. On specific things, we already heard from some Siege people about some of the rockets that went off in Stone Cradle and Orebreaker. One thing I want to know a bit more about personally is some of the combat in Lock and Birth in the final moments, and I believe our next caller has some of those details. I've been poked a few times by Bon Jovi here of GSG saying that they were on the front line when this rocket finally landed. Hello, Bon Jovi, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Hey there. First off, I apologize. I'm not personally familiar with you. Are you on the Colonial or Warden faction?
I am a Warden.
Okay, that's perfect. I was actually just saying I'd love more of a Warden perspective. We've heard Siege on here and a couple other Colonials, but I'd love to hear more from a Warden perspective. And you were mentioning to me in a PM and in the call queue that you were not only on the front line but streaming the past the experiences at Lock and Birth in the 5 hours. Is that right?
Yes, I was there getting coverage of the last at least 3 hours of the battle, including the final,
Including its conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah.
as a quick side note before I continue, because I do really want to hear this, I also want to hear from other people. We have a lot of listeners right now, and for all of our listeners, we are live in the Discord at the moment. Please join. The call queue is open. It's a much more free-form version of the Zero Dark PressCorps that you've heard in the past.
Yes.
And if you don't know how it is, join in and stay in our lounge. If you stay in the lounge there in the order that you appeared, we'll try to get you in call and we'll talk. And I want to hear some of the stories that we've heard from this crazy long and exhausting war. It's been absolutely incredible. So speaking of incredible experiences, what was it like in the last hours at Lockenberth?
To say it was hectic would be an understatement. It was constant, everybody trying to point some direction, trying to find something. I think there was 4 points at which we heard the sirens going off and that there was an alert that, a missile of some kind was going to be dropped on us. So we're scrambling trying to find this person, and it came down, I think, 2 times at least to artillery blind firing and randomly getting this guy. And then we, at least one account I know, somebody went up and bayoneted the person with the radio pack. I don't know about the fourth one.
The fourth attempt, my understanding, was a success, unless there was one that I missed.
Well, there you go. That's why I don't know how it ended. Because
bayoneting the what's the word I'm looking, spotter, excuse me, that's a bit of an achievement. For those at home who might not be as familiar with how rockets go, some of the rocket mechanics have changed. You have to be, one, standing on solid ground now. You can't be glitched out on cliffs or underground, or even if you're standing, I heard this from a Colonial from one of the rocket attempts earlier. If you're standing in a bunker, but like part of the terrain clips into the bunker, and that terrain is rocky, you can't be standing on that bit of the terrain either. Also, the maximum distance you can now spot with a rocket is 100 meters. So you have 100 meters out, and then a 100 meter diameter out that way is the way that's going now. So that it is a very small space to actually get a rocket in and land it. Very few places for a spotter to be on that western side. But anyway, this is enough of me talking. How was, besides the blind firing of artillery, what else was there for the defense?
It was, there was someone bringing up silver hands constantly. Just a constant stream of silver hands saying, get in, load it up, get out there. And the Colonial, offensive was amazing. But this is somebody who, I'm not going to come in here and say that the Colonials are, garbage or anything. That was quite an offensive. Respect. They had, I think at one point when I was there, they had 30 tanks.
I believe we're back. I have to wait just a little bit to make sure that everything's kind of coming through on our end.
All right.
Here we go. Bon Jovi, I believe you're here as well.
Yes, I'm still here.
All right, excellent. So I apologize to everybody, all of our listeners. I really hope we there we go, letting everyone know in the Discord. Yeah, welcome back, everybody. This is a bit of a weird one, I'll be honest. A bit of a technical weirdness, if you will. Specifically blaming on a computer update that hit in the middle of the night, essentially. So I apologize for the interruption, but we're back, and we're looking to kick off right where we left off. I was interviewing Bon Jovi here, a warden with GSG, excuse me, about the end of the 75th conflict. A lot of the listeners here know that the conflict ended most recently in with the rocket launching, successful rocket launching onto Lockenberth, not necessarily taking a new or the final victory point capital town for that victory and that win, but rather using a rocket to reduce the number of required victory towns in order to match the number that they had. It's a unique tactic, and it's one that we haven't seen pretty much up until now. Like, you see it once or twice, but with the amount of rockets that was used this war, like, this is the first time we've really seen that tactic really leveraged. Bon Jovi was there at the time that the rocket had landed, and I'm not quite exactly sure where the cutoff was. You were saying that artillery was used to counter almost blind firing some of where you thought the spotter was.
Yes. It was incredibly, like, we would hear the sirens going off, and these men would jump onto the artillery things and just start firing north. There was occasionally, like, mortars firing over, sending flares, but, like, they didn't have spotters. There would be, like, maybe one guy 50 meters away spotting and would run back and be like, I think he's over here. It was insane. And as I mentioned before, maybe it got cut off, but there was men bringing up, like, silver hands and stuff. Silver hands, iron hides, whatever we could get, just trying to stall this and rushing any front we could to try and find this radio operator. It was insane.
I saw some of those efforts just from the radio. I myself was stuck in queue to get in region. I would have loved to be there myself. But I saw some of those efforts coming down through Cragstown and the Winding Crag into there to flank from the north. I saw another Warden effort. The strategy here was sound, even though it was in another region. If the Colonial successfully rocketed Lochinberth after the Wardens pushed into Maiden's Vale in an area that they saw was weak, then they'd still have to take back one victory point. So this was not by any means an easy victory by the Colonials. The Wardens did everything they could to make this as close of a victory/defeat as possible.
Oh yeah. I'm not going to sit here and say the Colonials got an easy win. They earned this. A veteran to a veteran, that was insane. 31 days? It all bleeds together. I think 31 days of just pure insanity. Mm-hmm. I had no clue about that push in the south there. I didn't know about that. All I knew was I had to defend this or we lost.
There was a noted Warden bunker base in the, or maybe it was a FOB, I'm not entirely sure, in the Bubble Basin, which is that ice field to the northwest of Maiden's Vale, using some of the kind of ad hoc ramps, that snowbanks that go up and around to try to flank Maidens. The idea being, with so many of the Colonials tied up in Callahan's Passage, that might have been an avenue to keep the Wardens in the game long enough for a new breakthrough. Actually, that is a question I can ask you. Many of the Warden perspectives that I've heard was about fighting to a bitter end, but at what point was it considered by the Wardens a bitter end and not a possible comeback story? At what point was it like, okay, we're going to lose, but we're going to lose with style?
From everyone that I'm in contact with, right? We're not a big group of people. We're relatively small, but we peek our eyes into different channels. It was understood this weekend was it. We didn't know when, we didn't know how, but it was sometime this weekend. I, myself, had given up, I think, twice during this war, and I believe it's been a long
war.
Oh yeah, last weekend, the last Warden weekend, was something that inspired me, and I think it inspired everyone else to keep fighting, because we've been pushed back most of this war, right? And last weekend we were almost where we were now, or at the end of the war, and we managed to push back, and I think that inspired a lot of us. But coming into this weekend, I say we.
The Wardens in general.
Yeah, I believe in my opinion, there was a consensus that we weren't going to make it, but we're going to make it extremely difficult for them to win. We're not going to give this up easily. I would say that happened maybe Thursday, if I had to guess a specific day.
Okay, and understand, like, no one faction is a monolith, right? So that idea started with some people, and it took time to actually progress into this is what the faction will decide.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I get that. I just want to cover my bases. Some people.
Of course, and that's a general understanding, at least as we share stories here. Especially now that it's after the war, we could be a little more loose with some of the details. OPSEC is not as stringent, if you will.
Yes.
And some of that stuff, I'll be honest, I do wish was a little more open. As much as I understand operational security, one of the ways that people learn is not just through failure, and you hear that all the time as a bit of a platitude. A loss is a lesson. I say it's not just that; it's also the talking about it afterwards and the analysis and saying this is where we went right, this is where we went wrong. And it's as good a segue as any as I could think of. Where the Western Front for the Wardens was a slow and steady pushback, and it's really hard to pinpoint any one particular place here. And this is where I'll ask as much as respect as I have for Wardens this war, I'm going to ask a hard question here. So feel free to say, no, that's unfair. I don't think so.
Don't worry.
For the Western Front, which for the Wardens was a slowly fading line, if you will, where was the break point? Where was that first point that you could look at? Okay, because of this town that was lost, or because of this battle, or because of this movement over the course of 12 hours, this was the start of the domino effect that had us lose. Can you think of any? Maybe one battle, one front, one region?
I can think of two. Number one, Buckler Sound. Easily. That was that's a very defensible position. That's one of our Logi hubs. And it's kind of our gateway to the west. When that went down, that was a massive hit. I don't think anyone will admit that. They might be too proud to admit it, but that's what I think. Another one, I'm going to say Ulster Falls. That was the other way to recover. Because if you have Ulster Falls, you have that. I was at Ulster Falls. I was at that battle. There was multiple ways we could have saved it, but that river and trying to cross it with tanks was... We couldn't do it. We got pushed back almost immediately. We regained it and then lost it again. But I had to say at that point, we lost the West. Those two, because everything past that is fallback line after fallback line. There's no real wall. But that's my opinion.
I see. Ulster Falls I can absolutely see, and it's a bit of a hindsight. So Ulster Falls was taken before the rockets landed. Looking at the map as the rockets were landing, Ulster Falls became increasingly more important for the Colonial War effort. The only other logistics factory, looking at the closer ones, Veranic Coast has a very awkward thing with no way to really store supplies long term in Jade Cove. Fearmore has a refinery, but no factory or anything. Ulster Falls itself has the forwardmost staging point for the Colonials. So I can understand why that was a break point for the Wardens. An equally hard question, why was there not as much of a focus in Ulster Falls? I saw the Wardens pushing into the Longwine a few times, but never a major offensive into Ulster Falls, unless I missed something.
I might make people angry with this. When I was in Ulster Falls, I had proposed that we go around the drone and south to get the western side of that river. I was met with silence.
To specify, the drone is a small passage to the west of the Long Line. If you're at Ulster Falls and go north along the road to the Long Line, there's a road that kind of keeps going around that rock face on the west side. That road is the drone, and it flanks any Colonial push that comes up from the south of Ulster Falls. This is for people who don't know the map off the top of their head or are not looking at it at the moment. So you proposed flanking around the drone and were met with silence.
We were, I believe I have coverage of this as well, part of a massive tank push to protect Ulster Falls that wound up failing in the end. And I proposed, I was not the leader or the squad leader, even though it was offered to me, I didn't want to take it because I didn't want to take that responsibility. But I had proposed a simple operation that we go around the drone and down to the western side of Ulster Falls, and we could hold there, or at least give them a fight, while our tanks pushed on the eastern front.
I see. For those tuning in after we cut off, this is joined here with Bon Jovi of GSG, guest caller here in the press, talking about Wardens looking at Ulster Falls after it had fallen into Colonial hands. With Ulster Falls being the forward-most logistics position of the Colonials for the second half of the war, the question was generally, what was the Warden response to that when they could have responded? There were times where the Wardens held the long line. There were times where they made pushes down, especially during the last major Warden weekend about 7 days ago. So you were saying push down to the drone, cut them off. Didn't hear a lot from that. What happened instead?
Instead, they proposed to keep pushing down the Great Scale, which is the other side, on the right side of the river, the west side of the river, or the east side of the river, sorry.
East side,
down to Ulster Falls and hold that. I was very skeptical, so I took my tank crew we had 4, in a silver hand, and we decided to probe the drone. It was empty. There was no one there. We managed to make it to the bunker base before a Spatha countered us. There was no one there. It was completely open. There was bases, of course, but we cleared out the anti-tank and the rifle garrisons ourselves in one tank. It was completely open.
I see. That's alarming to hear. If you're a Colonial listening to this, alarming that a simple flank by one tank can go practically unnoticed all the way up to the bunker core. But this goes back to kind of one of the messages that I was saying before. Losing can be used as a learning tool, as a teaching tool, but only if you take the time to really be critical and analyze and say it and look at where you could have improved. So there's the obvious lesson in here of where could we have improved? Flank a bit better. So that's the obvious lesson. What other knowledge do you think you can squeeze out, milk out of that particular scenario? If you could scream at the Wardens for a little bit, because it sounds like there's a small desire to.
I'm holding back? Yeah. Okay. Just because someone may not have the experience that you do, or the knowledge of the game that you do, or the knowledge of the current war that you do, does not mean their tactics are not sound. I shouted this upon people who heard me and said, that sounds dumb. So I went against them, tested it, and it was correct. Just because somebody may not have the rank or anything does not mean their tactics are sound. Your ego should not get in the way of the war. That's the one lesson I would say. Drop the ego. If I had to be very pointed and bitter about it.
Understandable. And it's good to get it out a little bit, and I want to emphasize that on the whole, actually, I'm going to say again something I said earlier. Neither faction is a monolith. We do have a warden guest on at the moment. But what Bon Jovi is saying does not mean that all wardens have an ego that they are working on. We certainly don't want to turn this into this is what life with the wardens is like.
No, I don't want to say that at all. Like,
Mhm.
I've met so many wardens who are great people. It comes down to one or two people in every single scenario. It's not the whole thing. It's the people that seem to have the louder voice. That you know what I mean, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I want to temper the message is absolutely clear, but I want to temper to make sure there's no misunderstanding here. These kind of miscommunications happen all the time on both factions, and that is simply the experience of working together on such a large scale as this is, with such history that Foxhole has. Personality clashes happen, and sometimes we get blind spots, if you will. So listening, especially with, I have no idea what your rank is, Bon Jovi, but I know in general, we've had a lot of new players join. We've had a lot of people who don't speak English join the game. And I guess a sub part of that message is also like, hey, just because they're new doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to them, just because they're still trying to figure things out, or they don't speak the same language that you do, doesn't mean a right to ignore or anything like that.
Yes. I'm a warrant officer too, by the way. It's not
okay.
I know what you mean, but I'm not exactly like I've played this long or I've done this long. I'm still relatively new, but I kind of know what's going on. I get the idea, if you get what I mean.
Exactly, and it's funny. A lot of the people I talk to, no matter what their rank is, I've heard them say kind of a similar statement, if you will. I've heard Warrant Officer 2 say, well, I didn't really understand the game when I was a private, understandably, and now that I'm a Warrant Officer 2, I think I understand the game a bit better. And then also same thing to a major, and they're like, yeah, I didn't really understand the game up until I was about a major, and now I understand it. And I'll ask the same thing to a colonel, and a colonel will say, I didn't really understand the game until I was a colonel. Like, it's an interesting, socially speaking, it's an interesting phenomenon.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, I want to get your final opinion, going back to Callahan's passage towards the end there. One of the strong points that I heard you saying earlier was how much logistical support came in to Lochinberth. People bringing in logistics, endless amount of tanks and such, Silverhand after Silverhand, by your words. One, I'm going to assume a majority of that came from Kirknell. Two, with that, we kind of have the geographical map in our head of how the fight went. We have Colonials coming in from the west, from Cragstown, Lochinberth, Logie Road on the east side, relatively well protected by the procession. As far as I understand, didn't really get hit on partisans on that side, though we heard earlier by some of the Colonial callers that Warden partisans were constantly in the back line in that last fight. So this, we're going to turn it around as far as pointing out flaws and such. For a Colonial victory in Lochinberth, as respected as much respect as you're giving it, what did they do wrong? What could they have done better? Because as long as Lochinberth held out, like wardens were giving it hell, there must have been something that the wardens were afraid of. Like, oh, if this happens to Colonials, like, win this town instantly. Was there something like that?
Yes, there was several. The road from the Crags Road. I fought on the Crags Road when it was at the crossroads there, all the way back to the nuke. And at the very end, I noticed that the Colonials were focusing very hard on the north. And in the final moments, I was in a Silverhand as a driver, and we kept getting hit by one Spatha from the left on the western road out of Lochin. And it was undefended. Completely. They could have drove that tank right in and completely destroyed us. At the same time, the north, we had 3 tanks. And I believe I saw 7 at near the end there. 7. If they had made a concerted effort to push us, they wouldn't have even needed the nuke. It was over. I think the only thing holding them back, and maybe you could give me a little bit of wind in my sails here. I think the only thing holding them back was the threat of the Warden defense. But we were open.
I wasn't on scene. As I mentioned, I was stuck in queue. It seemed like a staunch defense. The Colonials brought down one of the Tier 3 bunker base cores on the west side, and there wasn't much of a difference on the radio how the defensive line held between before and after. Like, just because one of the core defensive structures fell, and yet the line still holds, that itself is an achievement. I want to clarify something you said, though. When you say that there wasn't much on the north, do you mean all the way through the Twisting Mumble and down through Whitechapel?
I was not... we came through Whitechapel down to Lock and Berth, and that was our main Logi road. I have no idea the situation at the Twisting Mumble. I was mainly focused on Lock-in.
Okay,
From
so
what I
you're talking
understand,
in Crags Road.
Yes.
Okay,
just the Crags Road. From Winding Crags straight down, following that mountain, that's where it seemed they concerted their main effort of tanks. I think, and obviously this is hindsight, I think ironically, this is exactly the same thing that happened with, Ulster, where I poked a hole in the side and it was open. I think if they had pushed on that western road, they could have made it. It was open. We'd been getting hit from that. There was maybe 2 anti-tank turrets there, and it was open. If I had to give a lesson or something, something like that, like a response of that, probe different angles of a front. Just because you think it's defended doesn't mean it is.
It's funny, any professional RTS player, and as I know this game is an MMO, and a lot of people say it's a shooter, a lot of people say it's like different things, but it draws a lot from RTS inspirations. You talk to any professional player, and one of the things that they will emphasize more than anything else is scouting. Is no unit is as overpowered as intelligence, and I don't mean like intellect. I mean the scouting and gathering information on your opponent. And I say this myself when I take off the press tags and play under my regular name. I think it's kind of funny that a Lance Corporal might pick up a Lowcaster, for example, and say, "Wow, this is long range. This is the best weapon." And then Lieutenant or something like that might pick up some other weapon. It doesn't matter what it is. Maybe they'll say like a Bane or whatever it is. And they'll say, "Oh, this is the best weapon." And then you talk to a Colonel, and you're like, "What's the most overpowered weapon in the game?" And they'll say binoculars every single time.
Yep.
The core point there was a little bit of a ramble. I apologize. But the core there being scouting, intelligence, flanking, those things matter more than just pushing the front line.
Mm-hmm. I studied a lot of tactics in every war, like just trying to figure out what works, see what people have done in the past, and there was an opening, they didn't see it, they still won, right? Credit where credit's due, you still won.
Mm-hmm.
But you could have won easier. And while that might seem kind of like pedantic, I think there's a bit of like a, because imagine if if that wasn't the final point, right? They could have nuked something that could have been of value instead of finding a better way to take it out without using all that, if that makes sense.
That does, and there is absolutely value in analyzing even your successes and saying, okay, like, where did we get tunnel visioned? Where are our blind spots? Where could we have done better? And that's something I hope both sides do more going forward.
Yeah. It was...
Anyway. It's been a war. It has been
Yes.
a war. Bon Jovi of GSG, thank you so much for joining me in a bit of an extended conversation here. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad I could at least give some insight and also anger some of my own faction by giving away what we did wrong.
My understanding is lots of actions in the game by both factions, anger lots of people all the time, as unfortunate as it is.
Yeah, everybody needs to just relax. It's fun to be kind of intense at certain moments, but at the end of the day, just chill out.
Exactly. That's a good lesson to leave on. Again, Bon Jovi, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of callers at the moment. There are a few things I did want to read out here. First off, if this is your first time listening to PressCorps, welcome to PressCorps. Recently, conflict number 75 has come to a rather explosive conclusion. And I'll read out some details with that, but on air right now, we're talking with some of the people that were on the front line at the time that it happened. We're talking with some of the people who have experiences in Conflict 75. And we're talking here live in the studio in the Discord. If you want to know the Discord information, I believe it's in our basic info. If you're on FOD, there's links in several places. You can just search PressCorps. Alternatively, just you can, I believe you can search us up. I don't know if we've set us up as a community server, but you might even be able to search it that way. FOD is one of the most reliable ways to find us, however. Well, I am going to continue taking callers, at least for a little bit. If anybody does want, just let me know in any one of the channels, our general channel, call queue. Either one of those is fine. Let me know if you have war stories to share. Please come join. We'll talk a little bit. We'll hang out. This is a very loose, very chill kind of moment. I'll give it like 5 minutes or so. If nobody joins, that's okay. We got a lot of music to listen to anyway. While people are joining, and while people are checking out that stuff, I do have a couple things that I did want the people of our radio program to listen to. One of them actually comes from another warden, Commissar Avitus of the 82nd Dread Corps Legion. During the final moments, actually after the final rocket landed, and specifically ending the conflict, PressCorps ourselves, like, we got a message from the 82nd Dread Corps Legion. Commissar Avitus is somebody who knows that the PressCorps is listening to, one, both sides, but also two, knows that this is a good way to get a message out to Colonials. And as much as we talk about this as a colonial victory and all, it's not said without a bit of a warden response. And this is that warden response, in part. It reads, and I quote, "The colonial heretics that washed against our lines for weeks always thought we would break. Like the cowards that they believe, we would act like them and give up. No matter how many times it takes, they will learn the lesson that the Warden Empire shall never give up, and we shall never surrender. You had to turn every city to ash in order to dislodge us. Our tenacity will never be beaten, and you paid in blood for that lesson. Unlike you, Colonials, we shall never throw down our arms, for we fight for something greater than ourselves. We fight for the eternal glory of Callahan. Siva itself broke before the Wardens did." Again, that was a quote from Commissar Avitus of the 82nd Dread Corps Legion. There was a secondary comment by Avitus that actually came through, and I didn't get the full transmission until now, and this is more of a transcript actually than a full message sent to us specifically. And it's interesting how it reads. For those who aren't part of the 82nd Dread Corps culture, if you will, it's a unique one. It's an interesting one, and every regiment has their own culture. The 82nd has a a very specific kind, and I feel like this one shares it pretty well. I'm going to share just the first couple lines. It's a bit of a longer transcript, but this is apparently a direct message from Commissar Avitus to the rest of the wardens. It opens with, we wanted to inform you that crew of... I'm sorry, let me read. We wanted to inform you that the crew of Polish bunkers survived their fall. I am on board with ORP Warden Navy submarine. Many soldiers died in a siege, even more were badly wounded. I myself have half of bones in my body broke, but I am feeling well. We are heading north to the country of Niknavin. Here we will be able to recover from our injuries. Federal Reserve of Armats was loaded on board for 2 more submarines. Those will be used, to rebuild the Warden army and prepare for a counterattack. It continues from there, inspiring the Wardens to not lose hope that they might have lost a battle, but this is one conflict in a everlasting war, and that war is itself far from over. And that message is absolutely true. It's a long transcript, and it continues basically saying that the Wardens are already preparing themselves for whatever comes after this ceasefire. And to that end, there is a bit of there's a bit of information, if you will, about that ceasefire for those who might not know some of the back end as it goes to it. I'm sorry, stand by. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was having technical difficulties. I am not. It seems we have a new caller, and while waiting for them to join up in here, we're going to take this caller, and maybe this will be one of the last ones for the evening. A little bit of detail, it was 749 days specifically in this war for conflict number 75 to draw to its conclusion. Again, a lot of people know it ended specifically with a rocket fire. Some other details that we heard, there was over 3 million casualties this war, and I can't understate this is by far the bloodiest war that we've had to date. 3,012,000 is the official number. There's a little bit of math involved. It's not super hard math, but I do want to emphasize that many shirts spent is an insane number. Most of those, about like 95% of those, are made by other players and other soldiers and such. Of what remains, from what we could calculate, we're looking at about 48 million scrap harvested for shirts alone. And this is just known from the casualties. It's somewhere around there. I want to say give or take 1 million. But 48 million scrap harvested for shirts alone. We're looking at 13,000 hours of scrapping collectively. This is the collective logistic effort of this war and how much impact it has just by sheer length and sheer deadliness of the war. It's been absolutely crazy how this war has gone, and another soldier from the war actually fighting on another front is going to be joining us right about now. I have here coming into the studio live is Neoblaze of the 157 Delta, 157B. That's a new regiment to me. Who are they and who are you?
So I'm Neoblaze. A lot of people just call me Neo. The 157th Dragoons is actually a Colonial regiment. I'm relatively new to the game and actually joined in the middle of this war, so it's been fantastic just experiencing all this and learning and figuring things out as we go. But it's been quite, awesome for storytelling, I would say. I really enjoyed the aspect of the community for that purpose, I would say.
Absolutely amazing. And this war has tons of little stories to listen to and share, and I feel so bad we can't get to every single one of them. But while we're here, I want to listen to yours, especially as a new player.
Absolutely.
So you joined halfway through the war. What was it like joining in for the first couple times?
So I joined in on day one after just running through some basic training and stuff, right? And then just spending my time trying to figure out the mechanics of the game on the front line, learning how to deal with that. And after one day of that, coming from other games like Ark Survival Evolved, I realized that this is one of those games you really want to be with other people and try to coordinate something much more effective, right? So I kind of used that experience and then tried to look for a clan. It was funny. I was actually reaching out to someone, I can't remember the exact clan at the time, but someone from the Colonial side looking for an invite to the regiment. And when I spawned into the home region waiting for someone to respond back to me, some guys recruited me there, and I got kicked off. So the next 2 weeks was a blast, to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like starting off right off the bat with like, hey, here's a regiment, we're organized, just getting right into. Well, my opinion, like we share the opinion. Absolutely, this is a team game. It can be done solo. It's really hard, and you're gonna grind yourself into the dirt doing it. But it is very much a team game. So the 157 Dragoons. Do you guys have a specialty? Do you specialize in any specific aspect of the war?
So it seems like we're mostly infantry, although I'll say the last week or two has mostly been like mechanized, tanks of some sort with infantry supporting.
Okay. And with the abundance of tanks around from different mechanisms and how long this war's gone, yeah, I understand playing with tanks.
It's been crazy. It was funny. The first operation I got into, actually figured out how the binoculars work and started spotting for one of the first artillery raids we did. It was much earlier on in the war, and it was I can't remember the exact area anymore, but we were doing a lot of stuff there. So I started out as artillery and then moved into more of armor usage. But yeah, it's been great.
High explosive. That's a really fun way to play. Just playing with the big fun guns, as it were.
Right, and like you're talking about earlier, I come from like an RTS background a little bit, so this is, really unique and experience in like how the strategy plays out and leading multiple people and that sort of thing. So, starting out on the front lines, move to artillery where you really get that strategic focus, and then recently kind of combining both of those worlds with sort of the mechanized fronts in a way because you really have to rely on the binoculars like you were talking about earlier, right?
Absolutely. I still hold that they are the most overpowered weapon in the game.
I would agree with you.
Specifically for like the information rate, and for a tanking crew, there's a couple really hard lessons to learn. I've found, at least me. I played RTS games that are more sci-fi. I never played things like Company of Heroes, for example. So me jumping into a tank, I'm like, I'm a tank. This is Everett Way as a private, right? I'm a tank. I'm invincible. I can do anything. And then I get stickied, and I'm like, what happened? Was that a hard lesson for you and yours to learn as well? Like infantry are essential.
When I was on combat, just like the first couple days, right, tanks felt like this invincible thing I could just never kill. Like no matter how much I threw at them, they'd back away, and then I couldn't see them anymore, and then they'd come back like I almost hadn't hurt them. So they felt invincible, right? But as soon as you jump into the tank as an unexperienced tanker, you really figure out that a couple stickies can actually cause you a lot of harm, or even getting hit by a mortar, right? And at first I kind of disrespected the anti-tank rifle, and then I learned my lesson quickly. You'll get tracked, So lots of fun lessons like that.
And it's really nice being able to learn those lessons and at least have a bit of an attentive eye and say, oh, right, it's not like the game mechanics fall or something like that. Not immediately blaming those things. It's like, oh, I got to look out for those anti-tank rifles.
Right, and one thing I'll say for sure is I had a newfound respect for nighttime, especially being in a tank crew.
As a tanker, yes, nighttime is very scary. So understanding those lessons as a tanker is one thing. Let's make those transferable skills just for a moment. I'm going to kind of play into the new person learning aspect here. When you go into a front line as an infantryman and you see fellow tankers, what's your thought process now that you have that experience?
Well, honestly, like the first thing I do is when I approach a front, you talked about scouting earlier, right? Most of the time when people do things, well, I'll say is, new players that are trying to get together and do stuff, right? One of the first things I do is I ask people on the front that's been there for a little while, what's the situation look like? What are we up against? What do we need? That sort of thing, right? Just to kind of get an idea of what the situation is. But if I'm going in as just infantry, I'd probably spend my first life or two just trying to figure out, where are people pushing from, what ways can I flank, and then if I see an opportunity, maybe I can grab 5 guys and run around and do some massive damage, right? So just looking for things like that.
Looking for openings like that requires a level of knowledge that implies that you know what an opening looks like.
This is true.
And that's something that I notice more of coming from newer players. Is they might look at a very deep defensive field, like a group of infantry looking at AT turrets and mines and all that stuff, and they're like, "Oh my God, there's a bunch of turrets there! Like they're gonna kill them!" Like, no, hold on. This is a game mechanic thing. We're actually fine. So, was there any particular game mechanic that was maybe harder to grasp or harder to understand going through all these different experiences?
I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I was surprised it picked up the whole wind mechanic quickly. I was having a little trouble understanding how the AI mechanics worked because it just seemed like once you had a base going on that everything was good. And one problem we actually ran into is we had a couple of our guys on a squad just waiting for an operation to occur. We built up, I think, some place in Wellchurch and started building a bunch of turrets and stuff. And as soon as we lost the area, some wardens rolled in and capped the base. And turns out that we didn't have enough people around to support the AI anymore. So that was kind of a big laugh for me, but just something that we got to understand from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. And it's rough in the moment where you're like, oh no, this was actually like a critical place to hold, and we lost it, and it does feel really bad. In the long run, though, it's a good reminder of saying, hey, this is a lesson. This we do better next time, and there's from that lesson comes 4, 5, 7 victories.
Absolutely.
Or more if you're like some of us and just give your entire life to this game. Advice for everybody: don't do that. It's a video game. Take a break.
I can definitely see getting addicted and spending a lot of time. I was talking to Marcus earlier tonight, and he told me he spent like maybe 7,200 hours in this game or something like that. It's crazy.
It's
1,700 roughly.
My numbers are also pretty close to that, I'll admit. But I've also been playing on and off for some 3 years. Yeah, try not to dedicate your entire life, but it is a great, fun game to jump in, and even like take it seriously. It's okay to like take it seriously, maybe for a war or two, and then back down a little bit. Just don't burn out to the point where you're like getting angry at your own people or just lashing out at everyone.
Absolutely. The one thing I've realized with this game is that you're constantly teaching new players that are coming in, and that's basically the lifeblood of everything you're doing. I mean, sure, you're gonna have some groups of veteran players.
Oh, Neo, are you there? It sounded like you cut off mid-sentence. Uh-oh, there might be something going on.
There may be something going on with my internet. I don't know. Can you hear me okay?
There we go. Now I can hear you. Yep.
Where was I cutting out at?
Somewhere in the middle there. That Foxhole is generally speaking a constant teaching new players how to play as a bit of a lifeblood coming in, constantly bringing new life and new ideas.
Right. So basically, it's all about teaching new people what you've learned, right, and kind of passing that on. This is sort of the main thing I've learned about that, right? And some new players are the easiest ones to say, hey, here's how you do something, right? And then as long as they're able to pay attention to your instructions and do things, it's actually pretty effective for the most part. Sometimes people bring in new ideas, and you're like, you know what? Never tried that before. Let's see how it goes, right? At least from the regiment that I'm with, a lot of us are relatively new, from what I understand. Some of them are a little bit older, but we're very trial and error at the moment, just to see, what can we pull off, what can we not. And I think that's been good for us to learn. Okay, maybe we had an operation that went really well, and then we tried again, and then one day it fails, and we start asking ourselves, why did this fail? For example, we spent a lot of time in Marvin Hollow. A couple of us did some partisan missions sneaking behind enemy lines and disrupting Logi for a little bit behind Saltbrook. And then one day we showed up and the wardens had figured out what was going on and they tank trapped the beach off to where you could even walk through as an infantry person. So that was a little bit hilarious, but I know others were doing similar things with that. So it was kind of a fun experience seeing that.
You're talking about there's a small little beach in between Lockheed and Osterwall. It's called Salt March, but it's not that Salt March. This is where all my I don't like poking fun at the devs too much, but devs, please. We have a Salt March and we have a Salt March, and then I think somewhere else, I want to say Drowned Vale, there is also like a third the Salt March or something like that. Please help us out here. So you're talking about the beach at Salt March in Marvin Hollow, right?
Exactly.
That was a pretty interesting spot. I remember at some point seeing Colonials landing 3 landing ships on that small beach.
Yep, just posting a visual aid in the Discord chat that you can kind of look at there. Some other stuff I was experiencing tonight we'll talk about maybe if we have time. But yeah, if you push across from Lockheed up into that beach area, right? That seemed to be a weak spot that a lot of Colonials knew about and were hidden for a while. It was rather fun actually, but yeah, just talking about some of the learning experiences we had, right? As soon as we couldn't get in there, or I think there was one night we logged in and there were so many people queued trying to get into Marvin Hollow that we actually couldn't get in there. So we tried to go in a different area that we'd never scouted out before, and that went terrible. we used binoculars to try to find a way around defenses, but we found ourselves, I think, on the southern shore of the Evil Eye area, and just trying to find a hole in the defenses. And the whole area was just lined with defenses. I mean, we could get across the beach, but that was about it. So yeah, we incrementally learn from our mistakes. Like, okay, but next time we go and do a big operation with 12 people, or maybe we're doing 2 to 3 vehicles at a time and don't want to risk too much resources, we definitely need to scout things out. So it was kind of funny. Like the squad that I'm working with, they would always be quoting my lesson learned from the previous night and just trying to improve on it. So good atmosphere there, and we didn't take our losses too hard.
Nice. That's a really good attitude to have, honestly. Not taking lessons too hard or too personally, and always trying to improve. I'm trying to think of any specific time where Marvin Hollow was majorly queued for the Colonial specifically, and the only time I could think of was when the Colonials first pushed into Maiden's Vale. There was a queue that was about as deep as some of the final fights that we were seeing in Reaching Trail and Callahan's Pass.
Right. I think that's when we were trying to get in there, and then we realized we couldn't.
If I remember, that was also a time when Saltbrook Channel was being fought over. The fight in Saltbrook was less towards Enduring Wake and Iron Junction. It was more north, towards North Star, and that concrete base was just absolutely stonewalling, literally, the entire Colonial Eastern Front at North Star. And I think that itself, with its bottleneck, was a major thing. So were you partisaning in the back of North Star, or in Saltbrook, or north of Brackish?
So it was I'm trying to think. It was north of Brackish. So we broke in. We'd go across the beach there, and then sneak our way up into the region just above Brackish, and then hit the Logi roads there.
That's Weathered Expanse, just for future reference. But yeah, not a lot of Colonials ended up in Weathered Expanse the entire war. So I could see that being a good opportunity if you're like, well, where can I... Just at the very basic, where are there wardens and no queues?
Right.
They're Logi lines, so just on a basic thing. Zooming out from some of the specifics here, partisaning and spec ops are not usually the kind of things that new players tend to gravitate towards. And it's interesting that you're saying a lot of your infantry play was partisaning, when a lot of new players join in because they're like, oh, we got this big, massive scale of a war, and this is badass, and I want to be on the front with all the tanks and explosions, and everybody's making combat callouts. So a new player saying that I want to leave all that behind and do the spec ops and do the not even spec ops, but I just want to camp a Logi Road for a bit.
Right.
What was your experience in the partisaning department?
Yeah, so it had its moments of like just pure joy, right? Like it's hard to experience something like, or it's hard to explain the experience without actually doing it for one time, right? Like for I did a little bit of Logi and understood the complexities of trying to build all of these massive machines of war. I kind of just dipped my feet into a little bit of everything, right? Because I was a StarCraft player previously, so I wanted to understand how the economy worked, and then
macro is king. That's just
absolutely
everything.
And
Also
one of the key things there is also about hitting the resources, right? So if you can understand how the economy works, and then stop that, I realized that Logi is a key piece in this game, and that if you can take out a supply truck worth of, I don't know, tons of crates of shirts, right? You're basically gonna be killing tons of the opponent off if you can wipe that out and get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or better yet, take it back to a friendly base and dump it in your own there. It's even better.
It's crazy the effectiveness of partisans, and of course it gets better if you're able to take the resources for yourself, but even just denying the resources.
Absolutely.
I've brought up, I think it was with Bon Jovi, one of our previous callers, that a lot of the inspiration for this game, Foxhole, comes from RTS games, just in its base structure, right? And hitting resource lines and harassing and doing that stuff is as important in this game as it is in StarCraft 2 or Age of Empires or whatever other RTS game of your choice. Even like Company of Heroes, something that's a little more of a direct analogy, has a kind of harassing backline with some of its factions in a unique way, but focusing on the StarCraft 2 just because that's what I played, so I know that. If you just have even a couple of the most basic units, like I'm talking for Foxhole, this would be the equivalent of like one shirt, any automatic weapon from your team, maybe like 5 or 6 clips, and just walking into the back line. There's no investment. You take down one truck that calls back to the rest of the effort, hey, this Logi line is blocked, and that stops Logi for a really long time.
Oh yeah.
Just the idea of stopping that for so long. Obviously, the idea is a little more intricate than this, but like stopping one Logi truck and then preventing more from coming down does more damage to Logi than people think. The return on investment is major.
I would definitely agree with that, because we actually didn't realize how effective we were being. There were other people doing it too, sometimes after us or before us, but we would see Saltbrook happening, we participated in the fights there, and it just got to stalemate. People would log off and that sort of thing. And so where we got into partisan operations is when we didn't have a lot of the main group on, right? We were just looking to do something organized and together. So that's sort of how I got into that, and then I realized the effectiveness of it, right? Like as a Zerg player from StarCraft 2, if I could send a group of 12 Lings into the resource line, I'm looking for major capitalization there. So, when I realized that I can do the same thing here with maybe 3 guys at the most, or two at the least, I was like, heck yeah, let's go for it,
It's funny. So one, I'm also a StarCraft 2 player, Zerg. It's funny because the most direct analogy for a Zergling, for those who have not played StarCraft 2, really is just like 2 or 3 riflemen that grab SMG, they grab a Lion Claw or something like that, a Dusk, whatever, and go into a backline and just find where there are going to be populated Logi people and just do that. That's about that's a StarCraft 2 analogy that we're making. That said, I want to give a quick shout out. This is going to be a bit of an analogy and a story time on my end. So there was a war some while back where I was playing not Press as Colonial, and I wasn't personally there, but the call out was that there was a Warden clan that was trying to extract an entire flatbed of resources. No idea how it was stolen, but the call out came from Heartlands. Not Blemish, actually. This was on the north end of Heartlands after they were being chased around to a whole bunch of places. They finally got intercepted, halfway past Fearmore in Lockmore, but way on the eastern side. It was insane. There was like a 10-person partisan versus QRF in a wide open area spanning like multiple sub-regions, just trying to catch these like partisans. And it was an incredible effort all in all. I'm going to shout out to HOC Clan because they were the warden group that were specifically pulling that off. And you'll have to ask them or maybe any of the other people for how the story ended, but the reason I bring this up specifically is that partisan can be more than just going into a backline and causing a bit of fear. You can really like ramp up the scale of stuff. Stealing crates of vehicles, if they are stealing vehicles themselves and getting them back into your hands. There's all sorts of things that can be done for partisan work. So to turn this analogy into a question for you as a new player, now that you know these mechanics and you kind of see what the possibilities are for an organized group in the game, what are you looking forward to the next time you play? Maybe it's not this war because you need a break, but what are you looking forward to for the next time that you play? What do you want to do?
That's a really good question. I've kind of tapped into a lot of different aspects. I don't think I've jumped into much of the base building pieces of it. But maybe that's something I would check out next. But there's aspects of that where you're just not seeing a lot of action, right? So maybe some kind of closer to the front line thing versus maybe just building up a base or something. Just kind of tapping into the building aspect of it. One thing I didn't realize was just how effective the tank traps were. I just kind of laughed at them the first time I saw it, and I said, "Oh, everybody's just going to go around that, right?" But then when I started seeing how effective it actually was, I was like, "Man!" One of the last not so great partisan operations we did. I think we were on the Tempest Island, and we managed to find a hole in the back of the warden area between one of the bridges and one of their bases that they had. We didn't last too long there with our MG guns and stuff like that, but we did manage to drop down a tank trap, and it was hilarious. As soon as we all got gunned down, I think I was like one of the last guys to leave. We see this truck just come flying over the bridge. He lands smack into the tank trap. And he backs up and he runs into it again. And I just busted out laughing. I'm like, guys, you can't see this, but just know the one tank trap we got down, it was effective. And at least it annoyed somebody, So, small victories, you got to take them where you can, right?
Absolutely. If nothing else, like obviously at some point they might have a wrench or Hydra's Whisper or something like that and blow it up or find another way around. But the annoyance, the morale hit from that. Morale is a big thing in Foxhole, and just little things like that annoys a Logi person to the point where they're like, okay, I'm done with this. It might be a little bit gamey, but that is the social and morale aspect is absolutely a factor in the war.
Right. As long as they got a wrench, it would go down pretty quickly. But we all know wrenches are hard to find when you need them, and when you don't need them, they're always there. It's kind of weird how that works.
It's definitely. I couldn't have put it better. It's weird how it works sometimes, but absolutely invaluable. For those just tuning in, or I don't know, maybe you've been here for a while and forgot. We're talking with a few people. A little bit boots on the ground earlier, but now live in the studio here at the end of the 75th conflict in the Foxhole War. It ended a little bit, actually a couple hours ago at this point, with the Colonials rocketing one of the last warden strongholds at Lock and Berth in Callahan's Passage. This war has seen some very interesting mechanics being utilized here. Between the artillery changes and really feeling how artillery is different this time around, to the most judicious use of rockets we have seen ever in Foxhole. It's been crazy, and we've been talking with all sorts of people from the Colonial and Warden perspectives, and it's been some pretty fun stuff overall. We're currently talking with Neo of the 157th Dragoon Division. That does sound like it needs like Dragoon Division. Maybe it's the alliteration, but that's where my mouth wanted to go. But anyway, with the 157 Dragoons, we're talking with Neo here, a newer player who just joined this war, asking about his experiences. Neo, I gotta ask, sometimes the perspective of the newer player is lost on us who are far too salty from playing the game for so long. Sometimes we lose the perspective. What was one of the harder things to learn about the game overall? I kind of asked this question with mechanics, but I'm going to expand this out to like, what was the hardest point of like the onboarding and new player experience?
I think my answer may be different than most, but just kind of the quick way that I picked up most things. I think the one thing that surprised me the most, and I give a lot of props to the 82 DK guys, and some of the media I've seen on YouTube for just how effective they are at stealing vehicles and stuff. Right? I just didn't realize how simple it was to steal those things, and so from my own experiences, there were times where I saw Colonials had parked vehicles in what seemed to be a very safe area. And in fact, I think one of our guys actually parked something and we thought it was in a good safe spot. And then right before I logged off, I hear explosions, right? So I go to check it out. See, oh no, the horde jumped in the tank and run off with it. So I don't know how that ended, but it was some people may be upset to hear that. But it's one of those things where you just have to learn the hard way and realize that if you're not really surrounded by good AI defenses, you probably don't want to leave the vehicle there.
It really does boil down to some of the logistics of account, because it's not like, okay, I'm done tanking, I'm going to log off and then just leave it. You do have to consider even just where leaving your equipment after you log off, how that factors into the war effort.
Right. I think one of the things that's been unique to me about this is like, some of the nights that I've been on and pushing through, we'll push like so deep into enemy territory, right? And then by the next day I wake up and all the progress is gone. Like places that I thought would have been safe have been pushed over, right? So when I start thinking about those things, I think, okay, if I wake up the next day and all the progress has been gone, what's most likely going to be the safest point? And so I try to incorporate that into when I log off, or do I leave tanks and that sort of thing. So
that's some good thinking. That's some good thinking.
Not always be the best, but trying it, right? At least you don't right before you log off find out somebody's run off with your vehicles.
Many people subscribe to the belief that one of the best places that you can store a vehicle is in your allies' hands, that instead of driving a tank back into like a logistics line to keep safe, or leaving it somewhere, to call out to your faction and say, since you're Colonial, I'll use, who wants a Spatha, who wants an LTD, who wants one of these, I'm logging off and need a crew, or saying something like that.
Absolutely.
Other people will say that that is blasphemy, and giving away vehicles like that is most certainly not a good way to keep your logistical health intact. It's different perspectives, and I think with different groups, different situations, different times of the war too, one way is easier than the other. How much cooperation, speaking of like lending out to other people, how much cooperation did you find, or was 157th kind of its own little isolated unit?
So what I've been told about Foxhole is that sort of both factions have their own like cultural norms, right? I've been told that wardens are very heavy in the regiments and the clans, that they work around and organize in those ways, right? And that's where we get Warden Weekend as an example. Whereas Colonials are, I'm kind of making generic statements here, but this is obviously not true for everyone. But some people say organized chaos, or maybe smaller groups of people trying to come together for, common ground there, right? And so even though as just the 157th, we've kind of gone and done our own operations, a lot of them I feel are more effective when you can harness the guys that are already at the front with you and trying to, kind of push that over, right? I feel like that's one of the unique things about Foxhole, and if you can like solve the problems of the front that you're on with the massive amount of either randoms or other small groups that are just trying to do their own push there, if you can really harness that like group energy, you can really major gains that way. So I guess that's one of the unique things I found about this game.
As it turns out, just like in life, cooperation and communication are overpowered. Those are the two things, and I will never ask for a nerf for either one of those things.
Absolutely.
They really are. Honestly, that is the ticket to winning, or at the very least, putting up a damn good fight. I want to ask one last question as a bit of a send-off here. We've heard from several veteran perspectives of where one can learn in success or failure, you can always analyze and learn some lesson from it. We've heard from veteran perspectives, and I'm going to try something a little bit new here. You're a new player, and even though you're learning how the game works, you still have your own ideas to come in. I'm willing to bet. So, or at least a fresh perspective, if not fresh tactics and strategies. As a new player, if you could put a message out to the veterans of the game, or even just anybody in the game, what message would you put out there from the perspective of somebody who, for War 75 was the first war?
I guess the message I would put out there is, if you see new players that are around trying to get interested in the game, just give them a helping hand, be patient with them, help them learn, right? Because the more you do that, the more you can organize in ways that I think everyone will benefit from, not just you, but there's, especially from like my regiment, right? Not all of us are on at the same time, and so we typically find ourselves in groups of 3 fighting with other fronts, and the more you can teach someone, the more effective they'll be with other players. For example, I've gotten a tank line with Marcus one time from the 45th Division. I learned a lot from him, and I ended up taking that with the rest of my squad and helping those guys out. So it just kind of pays it forward. Is really what I would say. Just be patient, be willing to teach us, help us learn from our mistakes, and give us a break, right? we're gonna mess up. Fortunately, I haven't been messed with too much on that, but it's just be patient. We'll get there.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Neo, thank you very much for your perspective, your words, and taking your time just to hang out here, tell your story.
Absolutely.
There we go. Got that. Okay. It's very late at night here. Everybody who's listening here at PressCorps, thank you very much for spending your evening with me after the 75th conflict has come to its conclusion. As I mentioned, it's pretty late night here. That's the last caller that we're going to take for the evening, and we're going to be signing off momentarily, closer to the top of the hour. We're going to send you back to the music there. I guess this is a bit of a final closing announcement. It's a bit of a sobering thought, in a way. How much effort was put into this war from both factions. Again, there's a lot of stories to be shared, and a lot of them are incredibly positive. A lot of them are like, even in defeat, there is honor here. And we see that very clearly from all the wardens telling their stories. Not just at the very end of this war, but even in some of the, obviously the clear one that comes out is the rocket on Skelter Course. Skelter Course, not Buckler Sound. Even there is a level of pride that comes from defeat, and in victory, there are still lessons to be learned. Humility can be found in all of these situations. That's what I mean to say. And a lot of these callers have really brought that in, whether they are veterans sharing their perspective on the higher level, the strategic, talking to each other, figuring out what is the battle strategy. Are we pushing up the west side? Are we holding here? Are we giving here? All the way down to the new players saying that, hey, even 3 people can make a difference if it's cutting a logi line. Absolutely everything that comes together throughout this entire game tells a incredible story, and I guess that's the closing point here. Is that's what PressCorps is here for, to catch these stories where we can, and tell them how we can. This is a bit of plugging ourselves here, but PressCorps, if this is your first time listening in to us, regularly we play music and interrupt ourselves live with breaking news from the front lines. We had been a little bit absent in the past 2 months, I'll be honest. With the past couple of weeks, we're kicking up a little bit. As you've noticed, there have been 1 or 2 small technical hiccups, including a whole Windows update. We had been trying a new system out that will hopefully improve how PressCorps operates. And on the whole, on the back end, it's absolutely improved. What that means for you as a listener is more PressCorps. You get to hear more reporting. You get to hear live stuff happen. You get to hear, just before the war ended, if anybody was listening in, we had one of our staff members, one of our radio admins, Emma, DJ an entire set focused on blues and jazz from the time period that a lot of our music comes from. It talks about some of the history and stuff like that. Please check that out. She's absolutely great with that. There's all sorts of programs that we have in here, anything from radio dramas that do play about every 3 hours or so. We have them play. We have all sorts of programs on here, and of course, the one that's probably the most what we're most well known for is the Zero Dark PressCorps, in which we have developers of the game come in here for a bit of a Q&A session. The conversations we've been having here have been much longer than the ones we'd have with them. Those are usually limited to maybe a specific small question at a time. But we have call-ins that people can come in and line up in a call queue and get some face-to-face time with the developers. These things usually last 2 or 3 hours, and we make announcements for them. The developers mirror our announcements on the Foxhole official Discord. We do a lot of this here on our own. Certainly not paid for this kind of stuff. It's all volunteer, and if you like what we do here, join us in the Discord. Give us a follow. Any of that stuff, any little bit helps. If you really like what we're doing here, and maybe you want to be a part of it, send me a personal message or send our boss man, Jeffrey Jennings, a personal message if you really like the kind of stuff that we do here. Otherwise, there's so many other aspects to Foxhole that make it what it is, and just every story that comes out of it. We try to share what we can. War 75 itself, far too many stories to share. Jeffrey Jennings will be the first one to tell you, and I'll be second, very close behind him. One of the things PressCorps is known for historically is a war documentary on War 19. It's on YouTube. Please check it out. It's absolutely amazing. And many people ask us all the time, when are we going to do another war documentary? And this war would be one if we had everything set up, if we had the people. I wish we could have done it. We have a lot of information, and there's going to be a lot more written stories that we'll publish out through the Discord. Stories from this war that will be coming out as we get them edited and published and formatted nicely and put out onto the front. If you want to share your story, doing it in our Discord is best. Writing it up there, letting us know what you have going on. Otherwise, to leave this off with a request from the PressCorps to everyone else is be excellent to each other. Be nice. We've heard lots of stories from different people, veterans to new players. And the overall thing is patience, cooperation, communication. That's what makes this game incredible as it is. Not long monologues like this, so I'm going to quiet up in a second, but just good communication and working together with your fellow people. That's what makes fun experiences like Foxhole, like War 75, win or loss. Doesn't matter. It's all a great game. From Studio A in PressCorps World Headquarters, this is Everett Way signing off for the night. Stay foxy, everyone. Have a good night and a good fight.